I'm a single dad to a wonderful daughter who's been the light of my life from the very moment she was born. It would be an understatement to say things weren't easy after her mother passed, but we made it through the grief together, and that had strengthened our family bond. My daughter had since grown and flown the nest, and we've always had a great relationship. But when she was growing up, I found myself gripped by fear that I'd end up losing her too. Sometimes that terror of loneliness was just background noise, something I managed to ignore by busying myself. Other times it was overwhelming, and I'd become so overly cautious and protective of her that sometimes I feel like I failed her as a father. She missed out on a few field trips, a handful of her friends' birthday parties, and a whole lot of play dates, all because I was just too nervous to leave her alone in a place that I wasn't familiar with. It got to the point where, around the time of her 13th birthday, I realized that I'd never left her home alone before. Even when it came to short grocery store runs, I'd insist that she'd hit pause on whatever she was doing to join me on whatever errand I was running. That worked when she was younger, but then the older she got, the more she appeared to resent being attached to my hip. The whole thing culminated in a small argument one day, when she was insistent on me leaving her at home so she could finish off some homework while she was still feeling studious. My words, not hers, by the way. I won the argument, and she had a face like thunder during the ride to the grocery store, but I started to wonder if I should be relaxing my policies as she got older. A few months later, after a long period of reflection, I walked into her room and told her that I was making a quick run to Target to pick up a few things. She groaned, slumped off her chair, and moved to put her shoes on. Then, with theatrical timing, I told her that I would be going alone. She smiled, the kind of smile that brings a lot of joy as a parent. It was a smile that marked a milestone in both of our lives. She was growing up, and it was time to start giving her some space. I know it might sound pretty dumb, but I actually got a little emotional while climbing into the driver's seat and edging out of our driveway. The whole kids growing up so fast thing is for sure overused, but it's overused because it's true. By the time I got to Target, I'd fought back all the tears, and after repeatedly telling myself everything is going to be fine, I actually began to feel a semblance of calm. Then, as I'm walking up and down the aisles, picking up odds and ends, I feel my phone start to vibrate in my pocket. I pull it out and see it's my daughter calling me, probably to ask me to pick something up for her. I press the green button, bring the phone to my ear, and before I can even say anything, all I can hear is screaming and crying. I just left the shopping cart where it was, sprinting out of the store and back towards my car. Then as I was driving back to the apartment, I tried calming her down and getting her to tell me what was happening. She just kept saying, I don't know. I think someone shot a gun." My next question was, "Are you hurt?" And when she replied, "Yes," I just tossed my phone down, got both hands on the wheel, and then started speeding back towards our apartment. Minutes later, I was only 2 blocks from my apartment when I saw flashing lights in the rearview mirror. I felt sick as I realized that I was faced with 2 distinct choices: run from the cops to get to my daughter and risk getting myself shot or something when I jumped out of my car to run inside, or pull over, try my best to explain the situation, and temporarily condemn my daughter to her fate. To some, that might seem like a real conundrum, but to a parent, absolutely zero thought is involved in the decision-making. You help your child, there are no other options. I never thought that I'd ever get into an actual police chase in my life. Aside from a few parking tickets, I've always walked the line and stayed firmly on the right side of the law, so the fact that I was gunning it away from a cop car, praying they'd understand my reasoning, it was surreal in the extreme. I raced the 2 blocks back to my apartment, skidded into my driveway, then got out of the car with my hands in the air as the cops raced in behind me. I remember them jumping out too, taking cover behind their open doors, and pointing guns or tasers at me as I screamed at them, "I'm so sorry. My daughter's in trouble. I couldn't stop. I can't stop." I kept repeating my story as one of the cops approached with his gun drawn, and I don't know if it was the tone of my voice or the look in my eyes, but all of a sudden, he stops and asks me where my keys are. Recognizing that he was giving me the benefit of the doubt, I told him that my front door keys were attached to my car keys and that they were still in the ignition of my car. He told his partner to keep an eye on me. Then he grabs my keys after shutting off my engine, then basically runs into my apartment to look for my daughter. That was a truly terrifying few minutes for me, because I had no idea what the cops were going to find. I didn't know if it was an intruder still in the apartment, or if all they were going to find was my daughter's body, and waiting for the answer with a gun pointed at me felt like an eternity. When the cop emerged moments later, leading my daughter out of the apartment, it was probably the purest, most overwhelming sense of relief I've ever felt. But when I saw that she had blood all over her, I begged the cops to call an ambulance to get her to the hospital. And the one cop who went inside said that he'd wait with her until the EMTs arrived, but the other guy was going to have to arrest me for fleeing a traffic stop. The cop was just doing his job, I know that. There's no way that he could have just let me go for starting a car chase, no matter how small it was, but he gave me dignity of just sitting me in the back seat of the squad car while it was parked across the street. Me getting arrested like that obviously made the situation even more distressing for my daughter, who had no idea why I was being held in the back of that squad car. But after she calmed down a little, one of the cops checked her injuries and came over to tell me that she'd be okay and that all her injuries were basically superficial. I asked him if it was 100% sure because my daughter had mentioned something about a gunshot when she called me, but the cop was able to assure me that she had no gunshot wounds, just a bunch of glass cuts to her upper arm and lower cheek. Again, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief, and for the second time that day, I found myself fighting back tears. A few minutes later, the EMT showed up. Then after a quick examination of my daughter's injuries, she was driven to the hospital to get stitches. That was my cue to be taken to jail, but I was out on bail in just a few hours later after being given a court summons for fleeing the traffic stop. I immediately drove over to the hospital to pick up my daughter, who by then had a line of stitches along the worst of her wounds, which ran along her jawline. On the way back to our apartment, I got her to tell me exactly what had happened to cause her injuries, as obviously I still didn't understand how a gunshot had caused glass injuries. She said that she was making a sandwich and getting a glass of water and had just placed the glass of water down in front of her on our little breakfast nook when it suddenly exploded. The explosion of glass was what caused the cuts on her arm and face, and right around the same time, she said that she had heard a loud bang coming from the apartment next door. Now, without boring you with too much detail, the layout of our kitchen is such that there's no way someone could have actually aimed a shot at her. But when I got back home and spoke to the cops who were still there, all became clear. They had already arrested our neighbor in the apartment next door, as the angle of the bullet holes in our kitchen showed exactly where the shot had come from. Apparently, the guy was drunk, or at least some other kind of intoxicated, and had decided to clean his guns without checking if they were actually loaded or not. He admitted to the whole thing, and apparently broke down crying in the cop car, thinking he'd seriously hurt someone after hearing all the screaming. He caught a reckless endangerment charge, which he was eventually convicted of, but he didn't see any jail time for it. He only has his guns confiscated after receiving a suspended sentence and mandatory substance counseling, and call me biased, but I think that he should have been handed a whole lot more. Me, on the other hand, I pled no contest to the traffic stop thing, but after the judge learned of the circumstances and how they were related to the other guy's reckless endangerment charge, I only had to pay $500 mandatory fine instead of having my license suspended for a year on top of that. According to my attorney, it was about as good a deal as I was ever going to get, as obviously no one is above the law, and the cops take fleeing traffic stops very, very seriously. In the end, it was clear to both me and my daughter that we had both dodged a major disaster, and it was something that I was very thankful for. But just as I gotten comfortable with giving my daughter some space and privacy in her life, the anxiety of losing her somehow came back 100 times stronger, and it wreaked havoc on my mental health. For the first time in my life, I actively sought out therapy on my sister's recommendations, and I have to admit that weekly sessions put a serious dent in my paranoia and overprotectiveness. I never turned out to be one of those hands-off, carefree parents. I'm still not, even now that she's moved out and living in some fancy apartment downtown. I'll always be her father. Not a thing in the world is going to change that, but this also means that until the day that I'm in the dirt, I'll always be scared.
I'm a 15-year-old female, and I live with my parents and my older brother. He's 18 years old. My parents work till late evenings, and most of the times I'm home alone. Sometimes my brother is home with me. My family used to take care of a mentally disabled person by giving him food, old clothes, and some other things. Sometimes he used to behave perfectly like a normal person. He was not that ill that I knew of. I knew him since I was 10. He had no family, and he used to live with the people that he was working for, basically cleaning and such. One evening, it was almost 7 p.m., and my brother and I were home alone. My brother was sleeping on the couch, and I heard a knock on the door, and I heard him, let's call him George for the sake of the story, calling my mother. I opened the door, and I let him know that she wasn't home. He had slightly moved in, and as soon as he saw my brother was sleeping there, he stopped and he started whispering and asking me for my phone number. I was completely shocked. Why would he need my number? And if it was for some genuine reason, why was he whispering as if he didn't want my brother to hear it? I immediately felt uneasy, and I made him leave by telling him to come on a Sunday to meet my mother for whatever reason he came for. He left. Fast forward 2 to 3 months later, and I was again home alone. My brother was at my uncle's home for my older cousin for the night. My mom and dad had to go see my grandma at the hospital, and my dad would be staying there, and my mom wouldn't be back until 10 p.m. Now, I was in my bedroom watching some YouTube videos when I again heard knocking at the front door. It was around 8 p.m., and I thought my mom's probably back early. So I went to unlock the door, and when I did, it was him, George. He was standing there at the door with an evil grin on his face. I was about to shut the door when he said he needed some water to drink as he was thirsty. As I've known him since I was a child and never really felt any danger with him except the last time, I told him to wait there, and I went to grab a glass of water for him. When I came out of the kitchen, I saw he was already inside our living room standing there, and I was kind of scared and confused. I gave him the glass, and he tried to hold my hand. I was almost paralyzed with fear. He started coming closer to me, and he almost tried to touch me inappropriately when I then slapped him. He then told me that he wanted to have sex with me, and he would then immediately leave after that. I was disgusted, and I told him I was going to call the police. After that, he left, and I told my mother when she came back home about everything that happened. To my knowledge, she told my father about it, and I don't know what they did to him afterwards, but I never did see him again. To this day, I still can't believe how my family took him in and he could behave like that. He truly was a sick f*** that didn't deserve our hospitality. My name is Angelo, and I'm 16. Around 3 months ago, my parents left me alone due to them heading to a wedding. I live with my family and dogs, Coco, Marshall, Sky, and Rubble. Marshall and Sky are pit bulls, so I had nothing to fear if someone broke in. A couple of hours after my parents left, I let Marshall and Sky outside to do their business. I heard barking outside, and I went to check on them when I saw a woman who was around 5'5" and in her late 30s standing on the other side of the fence looking at my dogs. "You have such beautiful dogs. Can I pet them?" the woman said to me. I was about 3 feet away from the fence, but I could smell cigarettes coming off her clothes. "Sorry, they don't really like being pet, but thanks for the compliment," I said to the woman while hurrying my dogs inside. She then gave me this glare, a glare that still haunts me to this day. When my dogs were inside, I made sure the doors were locked and I checked that the woman was gone. When I didn't see her, I rushed all of my dogs to a room that was the farthest away from the backyard door. I texted my mom that there was a strange woman outside trying to pet our dogs. Now, I forgot to mention, but there's apartments right next to our neighborhood, and we had a fair share of people stopping and looking at our dogs. But something about this woman made me and my dogs feel really unnerved. My mom said that they wouldn't be heading home anytime soon, but to be safe. A few minutes later, I had heard the doorbell, and all of the dogs went crazy. My bedroom is fairly large, but all of the dogs moving around was crazy. I decided not to bother to see who was outside and to just stay with the dogs. Me and the dogs were watching a movie, but I then heard clicks in my window. I paused the movie and I was starting to freak out internally, wondering if it was that same lady trying to break in. And then I heard a loud crash. I mustered up the courage to look out the window. I pulled back the curtains, and what I saw was shocking. I saw that same woman breaking into my neighbor's house. I quickly closed the curtains and called 911 on the phone. I stayed quiet as to not alert the woman. The operator said that the police would get there in about 2 minutes, but I then heard a shriek coming from my neighbor's house. I looked out my window and I saw my neighbor attacking the woman, who was then screaming at the top of her lungs. I was still on the phone and I had told the operator that my neighbor was now fighting against the woman. By now the police got there and they had to taser the woman for how violent she was. She was spouting swears that would make a sailor blush, and she was moving uncontrollably. The police took a knife and what looked to be a gun away from the lady. She started to say that she was going to kill me and my dogs and burn my house down. I think she was high and thought that my neighbor's house was mine due to how similar the houses looked. I was stunned, looking out my window, while the thought of what that woman would do to me and my dogs if she got me. I then started to cry, holding my dogs close to me. I didn't know what to do, so I kinda just sat there until I fell asleep. I had heard my parents opening my door, saying they were home. I didn't know what to say, but I then told them to talk to the neighbors next to us. Days went by, and now they insist that I can't stay home alone anymore. I can't get the image of her glare out of my head, and I now sleep with both of my pit bulls just to feel safe. I know I'll be safe now, but knowing what that woman was capable of doing just scares me. If that woman didn't break into my neighbor's house and broke into mine instead, I just know me and my dogs would be dead. Stay safe out there. For reference, I'm a 23-year-old female. The story took place when I was 17 years old and home alone, when my parents took a trip out of the US to Toronto, Ontario. We lived there for 3 years for my father's job when I was a child, so they were visiting old friends that they had made when we lived there. My older brother was out of state in college at the time, so I was alone for the week. It was a Friday night, and one of my good guy friends was supposed to spend the night with me so that I wasn't alone for the weekend. Something came up and he had to return home for the night, leaving me home alone. I wasn't worried or nervous at all because I'd been staying home alone since I was 12 years old, and as I got older, I'd spent several nights alone. My friend ended up leaving at around 10 that night. I texted my mom letting her know that he had to leave and that I'd be alone for the night now. She told me it was fine, but to just be careful and make sure the alarm was on. So I got ready for bed and I decided to sleep in my parents' bedroom because they had a huge TV in their room with cable access, which I didn't have in my room. I turned the house alarm on, got in bed, and started looking for a movie on cable to watch. My dog was lying on the bed with me, so I knew she couldn't have done anything to cause what happened next. About an hour had passed, and I was flipping through the channels when my house alarm suddenly went off. I immediately looked at the alarm unit by the bedroom door and saw the red light was flashing on and off. I froze. It was a very loud and repetitive beeping sound. I think it took me about 15 seconds just to process what was happening. Did the alarm just go off by itself? I thought. There's no way a door opened. Immediately, I started thinking of anyone and everyone I knew that could have possibly opened one of the doors to my house with a key. You know, since all of the doors were locked. I knew my brother wasn't coming home for the weekend. I knew it wasn't my friend who had recently left because I just received a text saying he was home. I went through all of my friends that I could think of, and every single one of them was either out of town or busy. I knew none of my neighbors would have opened any of the doors either. I went through all of this in my head in that 15 seconds that I was frozen on the bed. Finally, I snapped out of it and I ran to my parents' bedroom door, closed it, and then locked it. I refrained from turning the alarm off because I knew that it automatically calls the police once it hits 1 minute of going off, and I was also thinking the loud alarm would scare away whoever just broke into my house. After I locked the door, I went to my mom's night table and took out a revolver that she kept in there, just in case of emergencies like this one. Now, I'm only about 5'4", and I knew that if anyone came through that door had the intention of hurting me, they would have easily succeeded. I wasn't taking any chances. I took out the gun, made sure it was loaded, and took the safety off. I held the gun up and I pointed it at the door, but kept my finger off the trigger, as you're supposed to do until you know for a fact you're going to shoot. I couldn't believe that I was holding a gun and pointing it at something, and possibly someone, with the intention to shoot if they proved to be dangerous. I sat there mentally preparing myself to shoot whoever managed to get through the door. This is something I never thought I'd have to do. I remained calm and I didn't let my emotions or fear get the better of me. I knew I needed to stay quiet and keep my head clear in case something actually happened. I was kneeling on the floor in this position for what felt like forever, but I'm sure only about 2 minutes truly passed. The alarm was still going off, and I decided that I would call 911 just in case the alarm system malfunctioned and didn't call the police. I dialed 911, explained to them everything that was going on, and they sent 2 police officers my way. The dispatcher stayed on the phone with me until the cops got there. They checked the exterior perimeter of my house before knocking on the front door. I turned off the alarm and then put the gun away. I opened the front door and talked to the officers. They told me they found no sign of a break-in on the outside of the house. They asked me a few questions about what happened, and I explained everything to them. They again asked me if I wanted to do a sweep of the interior of the house just to see if anyone had broken in and possibly hid somewhere. Looking back, I cannot believe how stupid my answer was. No, I think it's okay now. The cops assured me they would remain in the area, and they told me not to hesitate to call back if anything else happened. I walked them out, locked the door behind them, and went back into my parents' room. I made sure my dog wasn't spooked at anything that happened, being that she's a 20-pound Cocker Spaniel and not exactly the guard dog type. I then proceeded to finally call my parents and then tell them what happened. My mom has always been an extremely calm person, so she didn't panic, and I guess I have to thank her for my calm attitude during all of this, because I'm a lot like her in that sense. My dad, however, was very clearly worried about me, being that I was his young daughter home alone. They asked me if I was okay and if I wanted them to come home early. I told them that wasn't necessary, and I'm sure nothing like that would happen again since the alarm probably scared them off. I hung up the phone with my parents, and I realized that I hadn't turned the alarm back on. So I went to the alarm system, entered the code, and pushed set. Nothing happened. It wasn't turning back on. I was confused at first, but then I realized the alarm doesn't turn on unless every door in the house is completely shut. My heart dropped. Shit, I muttered out loud. I had the realization that I had to now go around the house and look for what door had been opened and set the alarm off in the first place. This is when I truly realized how stupid I was to tell the police officers no when they asked if I wanted them to search the interior of the house. I went back in my mom's night table and picked up the gun, again, mentally preparing for the worst. I then went to every door on the ground level of my house, holding the gun in both of my hands. I finally made it to the hallway where the door entering our garage was. And it was there that I saw the door to the garage had been left wide open. Chills went through my body at the thought that someone had actually tried to break in, and they succeeded. Now, we had 2 ground level windows in our garage, so someone coming through there to get into the house was not far-fetched. I turned the light on in the garage and held the gun in front of me. I looked at the 2 windows in the garage, and there didn't seem to be any sign that they were opened. I immediately shut the door to the garage, locked it, and tried turning the alarm on again. It worked this time. After this, I went through the entirety of the house with the gun in hand to check if anyone had hidden anywhere. I prayed the entire time that I wouldn't find anyone and that I really wouldn't have to use that gun. And to my relief, I found nothing and no one. I slept with my parents' bedroom door locked that night and with the revolver under my pillow for the rest of the week. When my parents returned home from the trip, my father inspected the windows in the garage to see if they had been forced open or anything like that. As I figured, there was no evidence of a forced entry. My parents concluded that the door to the garage must have not been shut all the way, and a gust of wind came from outside through the garage, and then swung the door to the house open, causing the alarm to go off. We never figured out what actually happened that night. Since then, I have had one more experience with a possible break-in when I was in college and I came home for the weekend. That story wasn't as scary, but I was alone again, and my parents were doing the same thing during the first time, visiting friends in Canada. I'm now 23 years old. 6 years have passed since that night, and whatever it was, whatever truly happened, well, it continues to be the scariest night of my life. I can't even bring myself to imagine what would have happened if we didn't have that alarm system, and if I didn't have my mom's gun to feel safer. Although nothing bad ended up actually happening, I advise everyone hearing this story to always make sure your home has an alarm, and to always keep a gun in the home to protect yourself.
Disgusted and repulsed don't even begin to describe what I felt toward my ex-roommate. She was really something else. Moving into the dorms your freshman year of college is supposed to be one of those fun experiences in life, something you look forward to all summer. Well, I look forward to it at least. Move-in day went well. I was a little disappointed when they told me that I wouldn't be having a roommate. I always envisioned my roommate becoming my best friend and doing everything together, but I guess that wasn't meant to be. The first half of the school year went great. I made plenty of friends and had gotten really used to having the room all to myself. When they told me I'd be getting a roommate in January, I was actually pretty bummed. I cleaned up the other half of the room to accommodate the girl that would be moving in and just hoped that we would get along. She came the second week of January when we had gotten back from winter break. She told me her name was Cassandra, but to just call her Cassie. And Cassie didn't have much. She said it was because her parents never bought her anything, and whatever she had bought herself. I think she had maybe 4 boxes in total. I felt bad for her and told her that she could borrow some of my stuff if she ever needed to, but to ask first so I wouldn't think that I just lost it or something. And I quickly realized Cassie wasn't the average 18-year-old girl. She was different. First, she had horrible hygiene. I had to beg her a few times to take a shower in the nicest way possible because She would smell so bad that I actually would gag when I entered the room. She always thought it was kind of funny. She never washed her clothes, which also meant that the clothes that she would borrow of mine never got washed either. She would give me back my shirts with sweat stains and food covering the front. It was like this girl had never been taught any manners or basic social skills ever in her life. But the worst thing about Cassie was her obsession with eating raw meat. And I'm not kidding you. I walked in on her eating cuts of raw bacon one day, and she tried hiding it when I walked in, but there was no way that I could unsee that. I asked her why she was eating raw bacon. Not to shame her or anything, but I just was generally morbidly curious. Really grossed out, obviously, but still curious. She said it was something that she'd always done growing up and that her parents ate raw meat too and that it was just a normal thing for her. I honestly thought it was completely disgusting, but I also was trying to be a good roommate and as nice as I could, so I told her as long as I didn't have to witness her eating it in front of me, I was cool with her keeping her raw meat in the mini fridge. I should never have said that. The next day I opened the mini fridge to find it full of pounds of meat. All different kinds too. Bacon, ground beef, different cuts of steak, and even some goat meat. When Cassie walked in and saw me staring into the fridge, she looked at me. She was smiling ear to ear, so proud of her meat stash. She bragged about the deals that she found, and before I could stop her, she reached in front of me, grabbed a package of ground beef, opened it up, and started shoving it into her mouth. I almost threw up right then. I was yelling at her to stop, and with meat still in her mouth, she just laughed. I reacted in horror when I felt bits of it land near me, and that only made her laugh harder. The next day I requested a room change. I couldn't take it, but I was told that that would only be possible in the next 2 weeks. I was fine with that as long as it meant that I could escape the nightmare that was this disgusting person known as Cassie. She really freaked me out. I told her she wasn't allowed to borrow my stuff anymore since she never returned anything in a good enough state for me to use anyways. She was upset, but seemed to understand. We didn't talk much the week after I requested a room change. She continued to stash all her meat in the fridge, but at least she wasn't eating it in front of me anymore. A couple of days before I was due to move out of the room, I was sitting at my desk next to Cassie when she walked out of the room. I got a call from one of my friends and leaned back as we talked. I was looking around the room when my eyes settled on her computer. One of the tabs had 3 words that read, "Wanted. Fresh meat." I laughed and told my friend what I saw. He told me to click on it and see what it was because he was curious. And I never in my wildest dreams would have expected to see what was on there. When I clicked on the tab, my laughing quickly halted. My friend was asking me over and over what it was, but I was too scared to even speak. It was an ad that she had posted on a website I had never even heard of. And the fresh meat that she was looking for wasn't from a cow or a pig or a goat. She had posted a wanted ad for fresh, human meat. In the ad, she carefully explained how she liked eating raw meat and had always dreamed about what human meat would taste like. She seemed to be obsessed with it. One line completely caught me off guard and made me want to join the witness protection program immediately, and in it she said, "Eating human flesh has consumed my every thought. Sometimes I watch my roommate sleeping and fantasize about chewing on her." I took a picture of the ad on my phone and clicked off of it so she wouldn't notice I was on her computer. I grabbed my bag and headed out, telling my friend to meet me at the police station immediately. I told them everything and showed them the picture of the ad. In conjunction with the university and their concern, they spoke to Cassie about this, and surprisingly, she admitted to everything. They took it as far as actually testing all the meat in the fridge since we lived on campus, but thankfully, it was all either beef or pork. I was able to get a restraining order against her, and she was expelled from the university for apparently accessing the dark web while using the school's Wi-Fi and for attempting to engage in illegal activities. Now, for a while, people actually compared Cassie to that German guy, Armin Maiwis, who cannibalized a person who volunteered to be eaten. Who knows if she really would have gone through with it, though. I don't think Cassie was ever charged for what she did. I tried to distance myself from her as much as possible. Hearing her name 5 years later would still be too soon. After her arrest, I just never saw her again. I think she must have just moved away out of embarrassment for what she did, but she was expelled from the school. and the entire town knew who she was and what she did. There would have been no escaping the whispers and dirty looks, and I do hope that she got the help she clearly needed. I still don't know how anyone could survive eating raw meat like the way she did. I ended up getting a new roommate after that who was perfectly normal, maybe even a little boring in some ways, but that was totally okay with me. I'll take boring over a cannibal any day. What I'm about to tell you happened a little over a year ago, so it's still all pretty fresh in my mind. I was 18 and a girl in my class named Kendra was having a really hard time at home. Her parents fought all the time and she always talked about how much she wished she could just disappear. She confided in my mom, who was a teacher at the high school we went to, and my mom offered to let her stay with us. Only we didn't have an extra bedroom, so that meant that she'd be staying with me as a roommate. I was really upset. My mom moved most of my furniture out to make room for another bed. Kendra was 18 too, which meant that she didn't have to get permission from her parents to leave, so she moved in pretty quickly. I noticed right away that something was off with her. She would spend hours sitting in front of the mirror, just smiling at herself. I would ask her what she was doing, and she always responded that she was practicing. Only she wouldn't say for what. Most nights I'd hear her in the bathroom talking to herself, seriously having full-on conversations, and it really freaked me out. But when I told my mom, she just said Kendra was awkward and having a tough time and for me to be nice. Kendra and I never became close. She made it very clear that she didn't like me. She ignored me constantly and would express anger whenever I'd hang out with my mom without her. Her jealousy turned into something really weird the day she dyed her hair to look like mine. She even went to the same hairdresser I go to and gave her a picture of me to go off of. She was open about it too. I continued to complain to my mom about her, now copying the way that I look, but again she told me to just be nice and put up with it because Kendra was having a very hard life. Weeks went by and the copying got worse. She would repeat everything I said, but in different voices, almost like she was trying to mimic the way I sounded. She started using my clothes too, and no matter how much I told my mom it creeped me out, she always told me to just go along with it for a while. I started feeling uncomfortable in my own home. I hated being in my room with her. The worst nights were when I would wake up to Kendra standing at the foot of my bed. Sometimes she'd be staring at me. She'd smirk when I expressed a sense of fear. And after a few months of her living with us, I decided to start sleeping in the living room to try to escape the awkwardness of sharing a room with a person I had started to believe was a legitimate sociopath. The living room proved to be not too much better, though. She would still watch me sleep from the armchair across from the sofa and laugh when I woke up, scared of what she might do to me in my sleep. My mom never believed me when I told her what she was doing during the night. She told me Kendra always denied it and that I was probably making the whole thing up to try to get her kicked out of the house. I was done at this point. I decided one night that I was going to set up a camera to catch her in the act so I could show my mom and Kendra would be gone for good. That night, I set my phone on record and positioned it so it would hopefully be out of sight. I never expected to see what I saw the next morning when I went to check what I'd caught from the night before. I watched as Kendra slowly and quietly made her way down the stairs towards the sofa I was fast asleep on. She stood at the end of the sofa for a whole 30 minutes before she sat down in the armchair to watch me for another hour. Then she made her way into the kitchen. With wide eyes, I watched as she came back into the room with a large knife. She walked towards me and bent down to whisper something in my ear. Then she laughed and held up the knife above her head like she was going to stab me with it. Then she brought it down quickly, but stopped, just away from my face. I screamed when I saw her head turn to look directly into the camera. I wanted to cry when I heard her say, "You actually thought I didn't know what that was there? I know everything that happens in this house. Remember that." She then walked toward the phone and turned the video off. I immediately rushed upstairs to tell my mom, but instead was struck in the chest with a wooden baseball bat. It was Kendra. I screamed at her and asked her what she was doing while trying to catch my breath, but she looked at me with no emotion on her face at all. She started to drag me into my room, and as I was in that daze from getting struck, she began to tie me to the desk chair. She told me I didn't deserve the life I had, I shouldn't have been given a loving family when she was given an awful one. The goosebumps that went through my body confirmed what I was thinking when she said, "You don't appreciate the life you've been given, so I'm taking it." I started shaking uncontrollably, begging her to let me live. She laughed and told me that she wasn't going to kill me. She was just going to live as me for a while. I didn't really know how that was possible, but I decided it was best not to antagonize the crazy person right in front of me. And I was already pretty sure that she'd broken a few of my ribs with a bat, and I didn't want her to pick it up again and continue where she left off. She dragged me, still tied to the chair, and put me in the closet and closed the door. I could still see her through the cracks and cringed when she put on more of my clothes and styled her hair to match mine. Finally, I could hear the sound of the door opening and my mother coming home from work. She called out my name and I started screaming for her to help me. Kendra opened the closet door and told me to be quiet or she'd hurt my mom, so I shut my mouth. I watched as my mom burst into the room and asked her where I was since she'd heard me calling for help. I started to feel sick when Kendra said, "But Mommy, it is me." My mom looked at her with pure confusion and asked her what she meant, and Kendra kept repeating herself, "It's me. Don't you recognize your daughter?" I saw my mom's face drain of color when she asked Kendra what she'd done to me, and that's when Kendra had enough. She shoved my mother to the ground and screamed in her face that she was her daughter and she needed to act like it. My mom got up slowly and as nicely as she could, she says, Oh my goodness, I don't know what's got into me today. Of course you're my daughter. Let's make some tea. Just stay right there." She left the room and Kendra opened the closet door to tell me her plan was working and that my mom believed her. I, of course, knew that clearly wasn't the case and that Kendra had lost her mind. I was 100% positive my mother was downstairs calling the police, but I wasn't going to tell Kendra that though. My mom came back upstairs 15 minutes later and told Kendra that tea was downstairs and to please join her. Kendra and my mom left the room and within seconds, I heard the police entering and her being arrested. My mom found me in the closet soon after and untied me. She immediately apologized for never believing me, and in that moment, I was just happy to be in my mother's arms. Kendra was charged with assault with a deadly weapon at first, but was deemed unfit to stand trial. Instead, she was sent to a mental facility where they'd assess her condition further to decide whether or not she should be a danger to herself or others. She was sentenced to spend at least 3 years in that facility before she'd have the chance to get out. All in all, the experience was truly a nightmare, but I also couldn't help but feeling at least a little sorry for Kendra. She was never given a chance in her life to grow into anything but what she became. She may have been the scariest roommate I'd truly ever had, but I don't blame her. I blame her horrible parents. If they had just given her the life she deserved, I doubt that wherever her mental health started to deteriorate, it may have never actually gone down that route. A couple months in her stay in that facility, I got a letter from Kendra in the mail. In it, she told me that she was on medication and had plenty of time to think about what she did. She apologized and expressed how much she hoped I could forgive her. I actually wrote her back telling her I had already forgiven her and that I hope she continues to get the help that she needs and that there was no hard feelings between us. And even though I have forgiven her, I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't still a part of me that's scared of what she might do when she does eventually get out.
My brother is a 16-year-old boy who's thin, weak, and short. On the other hand, I'm an 18-year-old male. I'm athletically built and tall. My parents had recently been hired for new jobs at our local clinic, and they were really struggling with time management. This left me and my brother most of the time home alone, which we understood, and we had no problem with it. However, one night in particular, I was obligated by my school to attend a camp that one of my extracurricular clubs was hosting in a different city not too far away. Ultimately, I decided I really wanted to go, as most of my friends had already confirmed they would be going as well. I decided not to tell my parents about the club. I mean, I'm already 18, and I believed it was unnecessary to ask for permission. Now that I think about it though, not asking for permission is yet to this day my worst decision ever. As night fell and my parents departed to their workplace, I began telling my brother everything he needed to know before I left that afternoon. He seemed hesitant at first, but soon realized I was extremely excited to finally leave our small town and explore something new. He promised everything would be alright and that he wouldn't tell our parents he'd be alone until the next morning. Before leaving, I acknowledged how selfish I was being and the potential harm that my brother could possibly face. I texted one of my friends who had previously told me she was willing to babysit as a side hustle. I explained the situation, and immediately she agreed to stay over and watch for my younger sibling. I told my brother about the girl that he'd let in and the reasoning behind her presence. I felt relieved, but still felt guilty. My ride showed up, and I eventually left before the babysitter even arrived. Later that night, I received various text messages from my brother. However, I decided to ignore them, as I was busy unpacking most of my stuff, and those messages were probably weird and funny TikToks that he usually sends me. Well, around 12 a.m., I got a phone call from him. I silently picked up the phone, trying to avoid waking up everyone who was already asleep, and instantly felt the world turn upside down when I heard loud crying and breathing. That was all I heard for the first 20 seconds, until I finally called out again. "Hello? Who is this? Are you okay?" Finally, my brother replied, "JJ, there's people in the house looking for the girl. She's hiding somewhere, and they know I'm here. I'm scared." I initially thought it could be a prank, as it sounded so weird and almost pulled out of a horror movie. Nevertheless, the crying and breathing said otherwise. I told my brother to stay hidden and to call the cops. As I was talking to him though, I had heard a gunshot in the background, followed by a sound of screaming and yelling. At this point, my brother had begged me to return and to call my parents. So I did, and I then explained as fast as I could. They immediately questioned me, but I told them there wasn't much time left, and they had to go back home. Meanwhile, I was trying to get one of the teachers to drive me back home. Luckily, he agreed after hearing my very detailed story amidst my panic attack. Once I arrived home, there were infinite cop cars and many ambulances near the premises of our house. My brother was unharmed, but in a shocked state. I apologized profusely and I tried to comfort him while being scolded by my parents. To this day, I'm unaware of the reasoning behind the events that unfolded in my house that particular day. No casualties were found, only several bullet holes around the house. I learned to not ever trust anyone, or at least have a background check for the people I let in my house, especially when my little brother is alone. I'll be sure to provide an update if something else comes up. I genuinely doubt there will ever be one, as I reside in a small town and the police are sometimes not as helpful as we assume they are. Stay safe, and remember that sometimes not everything goes as planned. The moral of the story is to not be selfish. Well, for me anyways. My name is Thomas. One night, my friend for privacy reasons who we'll call Aaron was home alone for the weekend because his parents had left for a business trip. So he called me over and he asked if I wanted to have a sleepover. I had rode my bike around 7:30, entering from the back gate, and from his back door, I had then greeted him, and we ordered a pizza and played quite a few video games. We eventually got bored, so we watched a movie. Halfway throughout the movie, we decided to ding-dong ditch a few houses. After many laughs, we head back to Aaron's house. After a few minutes, we had heard a banging coming from the front door. We were shocked, but when we opened the door and there was no one there, we had saw a note that then read, "I'm coming for you." So we shut the door so fast, locking it from the top lock and the bottom one. Now, Aaron lives in a 2-story house, so keep that in mind. Neither one of us knew what to do, But we calmed down after we stated it could be a prank on us from the people in our school, because there was actually a prank war going on. So about another half hour into the movie, we both froze due to the sound of the front door then turning, when both of us just started thinking again about the creepy note we had gotten. When we both raced into his room, which is on the second floor. "Oh shit. Dude, I forgot to lock the door," I said. As I said that, we had heard the back gate begin opening. Aaron was aggressively telling me to go lock it. When I went to the back door, I could then see a silhouette of about a 6-foot-tall man looking inside through the door, but I don't think he saw me in return. Aaron had come down and caught up with me when I then signaled to him to go back to the room. We went into the room and we shut the door, but it had no lock due to his strict parents. I told him to call the cops and his parents, but he said no, that he wasn't allowed to have anyone over for the weekend, and he didn't want to get in trouble, so we had no choice but to hide under his bed. We began to then hear what sounded like the house being completely ransacked, things being thrown around and broken, doors slamming, etc. Then it got worse, even more terrifying than it already was. We began to hear footsteps coming up the stairs. Aaron's door then slowly opened. We had heard the closet open and then clothes being moved around. And then he just seemed to stop. The bed we were hiding under had a huge blanket over it that hung all the way down to the ground level. So unless someone moved the blanket, you couldn't see us. 20 minutes later, I'd asked Aaron, "Dude, do you think we can run yet and get the f*** out of here?" But then, before I could even react, Aaron was then immediately dragged from underneath the bed, to which I then heard the most disturbing, ear-shattering scream which Aaron let out while being dragged from under the bed. It was right then and there that I knew I had to f***ing do something or someone was going to die that night. I got out from under the bed to see Aaron struggling to get loose from the 6-foot psycho's death grip. I desperately searched the house to find something to use as a weapon. I found a screwdriver. I ran back upstairs, charging towards the man, and made absolutely sure I stabbed him and got the screwdriver fully through his back. He then let out a blood-curdling scream, letting go of Aaron. We quickly ran out to Aaron's backyard, which led to the very dark woods. We then hid in some bushes near the entrance of the forest. We saw the man leaving the back gate, now holding a knife, which I guess he took from the kitchen. I felt his eyes pass me when Aaron then whispered, "We gotta run." To which I then replied back with, "Why the f*** would we run now? We've came this far. Might as well keep going." "But dude, he's coming right at us," Aaron said. And he was right. The man was running straight towards us. I still to this day don't know how he saw us in the pitch black like he did. Aaron had lived in the countryside of town, so the neighbors were about 1 to 2 miles away, and the road was a straight path, so he could easily see us. My lungs felt like they were on fire, and I ended up falling because of a tree root sticking out. Aaron stayed with me, trying to pick me up, but the man was right behind us, and he was at least 7 feet away from us. I could clearly see him in a tall black hoodie and white sweatpants. I don't know how, but this time luck was finally on our side. It seemed that this time he didn't see us. He then ran off in the other direction, and we sprinted even faster. I was the slower one, but I swear I could hear leaves crunching behind us. We entered the back gate, making sure to lock it. Remember before how Aaron was too scared to call his parents or the cops because of the repercussions of him getting in trouble? Yeah, well, that. I told Aaron to call the damn cops already, that it's gotten too bad. We need the help. And with much hesitation, we finally called them. I stayed on the lookout to see if I saw the man coming back. It was so dark out and I couldn't see a thing, but I then did something so regrettably stupid. I shined the flashlight in the woods when I saw it. I saw his dark, tall silhouette. I thought he was going to run directly towards us yet again, but no. He just turned around and ran back into the dark woods. The cops arrived and they searched the property, but they didn't find him. They only found the missing kitchen knife he took. The cops claimed there was going to be an investigation, but with not much to go off besides the knife, I really doubt much was ever done. And if there was, we never got an update on it. My guess is the guy's still out there somewhere, wreaking havoc. But yeah, that's the story of how me and my best friend Aaron almost died while home alone together. Stay safe, everyone, and make sure to lock the doors and windows at all times. It just may end up saving your life someday. This event lasted less than 5 minutes, but was still one of the scariest moments of my life. My aunt and uncle, who were both major junkies, moved into our house when I was around 9 years old. Though I really looked up to my aunt, I was always very uncomfortable around my uncle, who was, to put it nicely, the epitome of abusive white trash that one may imagine. He was skeleton thin from drugs, had a shaved head, covered in poorly done vulgar and racist tattoos, and to top it off, he had missing and rotting teeth. He was always drunk or high, and definitely wasn't good around kids. Well, one evening, my mother went out with my aunt, so my uncle was there, though he wasn't our usual assigned babysitter. Cass, my twin, and I had been taking care of ourselves and my little brother for years at that point, and we were certainly more mature than my uncle could ever be with all of his missing brain cells. Cass and I were hanging out in the living room while my brother slept upstairs in his room. My uncle suddenly came staggering out of his room, which was directly next to the living room. He squinted his eyes like he didn't recognize us. Now, we weren't afraid at all of our uncle, but we definitely weren't about to listen to him. Our uncle had then tried to kick us out of the living room, but we didn't have a TV in our room, so I'm sure that I said something that made him angry. More than likely telling him we didn't have to listen to him and that he had his own TV in his room. He marched back into his room, and I thought that was that. But then, he came back in holding a pillow from his bed. Before I could even begin to comprehend his intentions, he had stomped across the room and then pinned me to the couch, fully holding the pillow over my head. Even writing this, I can feel my heart pounding, and I'm having trouble completely catching my breath. I couldn't breathe, and I just remember throwing my hands about frantically trying to pull his hands off. I had bit my nails as a kid, so I couldn't even dig my nails into him. I was gasping for air and quickly losing consciousness when I then heard my sister screaming. I was about to fully black out when the weight lightened and I was able to throw it off, gasping like a fish out of water. Cass had jumped onto his back and he had flung her off, panting hard with such a cold look in his eyes as he staggered back. My uncle stormed out of the house, cursing at us, and we immediately locked the glass bag door behind him. We sobbed and held each other, sitting in the middle of the living room. We fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and we only woke up when the front door unlocked and then opened a few hours later. We ran to meet my mother and aunt at the front door, but they were both drunk off their asses and were giggling and shushing each other as they staggered in. I knew that they'd be no real help now, but Cass explained, and my mom was actually overly nice when she was drunk, so she then hugged us and began crying, telling us how much she loved us, which was a rarity. She and my aunt stayed up with us, them still drinking, and they turned on a horror movie and gave us each a shot. I know what you're thinking, but even at 9 years old, we weren't about to turn that down. When my uncle began banging on the glass bag door at 4 a.m., my aunt staggered over and told him to go f*** himself and to sleep outside for the night. He didn't come back for 3 days, but when he did, he acted like nothing had ever happened, and he avoided us like the plague. So dear readers, don't trust someone with your kid just because they're family, especially if they're family like mine. You never know what someone is truly capable of, especially in a moment of rage. This probably won't seem very scary to most, but it's one of the scariest moments of my life. If my sister hadn't have intervened, I truly believe he would have possibly killed me. Even more than 10 years later, I still wake up sometimes gasping for air, like it may be my last.
Back when I was a student, I used to work as a bartender in a nightclub here in Liverpool. Most places kicked out at about 2 a.m., but we stayed until about 6 a.m. and just mopped up all the business that came spilling out of the other trendier places. This meant that we got some absolute messes propping up our bar on a nightly basis, and you could roughly divide the idiots that patronized us into 4 categories. 1. Happy drunks, occasionally annoying but generally favorable. 2. Sad drunks, frequently annoying, tend not to tip. 3. Sleepy drunks, usually have to rouse these buggers out from the warmer, comfier corners of the end of the night. And last but not least, the rare and mystical blackout drunks. Totally unpredictable, avoid at all costs, removed from premises as soon as possible. When I say blackout drunk, I don't necessarily mean people who just got too drunk to stand up and end up passing out. No. Blacking out when drinking is an actual medical thing. Don't quote me on the ins and outs, but from what I understand, some people have a very particular reaction to alcohol. Not all the time, just some of the time, and it causes a complete mental break. People can do outrageous things and have no memory of it whatsoever. They have zero inhibitions, zero social cues. The car is driving, there's just no one at the wheel. Now you see how dangerous that can be and why I added the whole removed from premises type thing. So the stage is set for my scariest post-work encounter ever. It's been a quiet night. People are coming and going in dribs and drabs, and we get this one guy who comes in dressed in what look like work gear. He seems a bit worse for the wear, but more like he just had a rough day, so my colleague gives him the benefit of the doubt and gives him one last pint of lager for the road. Maybe an hour after, he's leaning up against the bar, staring into space, with this glassy, watery look in his eyes. Classic blackout case. Not falling down drunk, still semi-lucid, but there's just no one behind the eyes. We're close to closing anyway, so I prompt the door staff to come over and ask him to leave. He seems a bit confused at first, but soon complies and he's out the door. No drama. We close, do a really quick clean down, and we're all out the doors about 45 minutes later. I usually walk all the way home since it's only a fairly short distance and the area tends to be completely deserted at the time of morning. Only on this occasion, our blackout drunk friend is sitting on a wall on the opposite side of the street, just staring into space like they always end up doing. But as I'm looking at him with a bit of concern, wondering how he's going to get himself home, he looks up at, notices me, and then immediately starts crossing the road towards me. He doesn't engage though. He just stays behind me on the pavement, following at a steady pace. I'm getting increasingly frightened, and I'm trying to keep my cool, but I can actually hear his footsteps getting louder and louder on the pavement behind me. So I pull out my phone and fake a call with my boyfriend. I was single at the time, saying I was about to catch the bus home. But what's that? You want to come and give me a lift? You'll be here any second because you're already in the area? Okay, thanks, babe. You're the best. Then, heart pounding, I walk about 50 meters to the nearest bus stop and plonk my butt down on the bench. Blackout guy hangs around for a bit, not looking like he's doing anything in particular, but I know what he's hanging around for, and it's scaring the bejeebies out of me. But thankfully, with a bluff of my boyfriend coming to pick me up having apparently worked, he starts shuffling off along the road and eventually out of sight. Only trouble was, he walked the same way I needed to get home, but it was no massive issue. I could just hop the first bus, it was due in like 15 minutes, and take the L for the bus fare, but I'd definitely get home safe and sound. Bus comes, I get on, take a seat, happy days. Next bus stop comes along, bus stops, only one passenger shuffles onto the bus and drops a handful of change into the little coin tray. I look up. Guess who it is? It's Blackout Guy, who without looking at me walks past and takes a seat just behind me. I'm just absolutely bricking it by this point, and I've completely run out of ideas. I know the guy's going to get off at the same stop as me, follow me home, and then what? I lived alone at the time. I'd have been buggered. Out of pure nervousness, I remember checking my watch, and that's when I got the idea that saved me. Right by my flat, immediately as you get off the bus, there's a Tesco Metro, and since it was just past 7 a.m., it would have just opened. That Tesco would have been rocking a security guard and possibly an office I could ask him to hide me in. It wasn't the best idea, but it was definitely worth a shot, and it turned out it was the best idea I could possibly have had. Like clockwork, the guy got off the bus with me and followed me to the Tesco. I was a bit shaky when I approached the security guy, but as soon as I explained what the deal was, he ushered me off into a security office where they normally detain shoplifters and all that. Police were called, and the blackout guy actually hanged around the Tesco, waiting for me to reappear, so he was an easy caller. I'm not sure if they charged him with anything, or just gave him a bed for the night. I don't care though, to be honest. He was out of my hair, I was safe, and that's all I was arsed about. I don't know if he saw through my fake phone call or something, but him working out that I was on that bus was honestly one of the worst moments of my life. Like this proper oh no moment that I've never have repeated before or since. I just feel bad for girls who don't have anyone to run to when something like that happens. Girls who aren't as lucky as me, who don't get to go home, sometimes, ever again. I think I was about 19 or 20 when this happened. I was walking home after a night with the homies, and since I was feeling jolly, or high should I say, I decided to take the long way home. The long way home consisted of walking down this big old boulevard with some really nice big houses on it. I think they were all built around the turn of the century, and some of the ornate brickwork could make you feel like you've gone back in time if it wasn't for all the latest model Mercedes parked in the driveways. So I'm walking kind of slow, just sort of moseying down the middle section, which has all of these flower beds on it. Like I said, it's a real nice place. So nice, in fact, that a punk kid like me in skate shoes, a beanie, and a black hoodie doesn't fit in at all. Which is why, although I can't condone what happened next, I can kind of understand it. So as I'm walking, I'm like looking up at all the stuff carved into these strips of stone near the rooftops. Some got dates on them, some got carvings, when all of a sudden, I hear this dude like, Hey you, what are you looking at? I look down to see this dude sitting on the front steps of what I assumed was his house. I'm just minding my own business, not doing anyone any harm, so I kind of replied defensive like, Nothing. What's it to you? His response to that is to just get up off his butt and start marching towards me. And only then do I see how monstrous this dude really is. He's huge. I must have instinctively started backing up like, whoa dude, chill, but he just keeps coming, gets right up in my face and starts growling these demands that I tell him what I was looking at. I just say like, The houses, dude. What do you want? And then for some godforsaken reason, what I thought would be a totally harmless answer turns out to send him into what I can only describe as a fit of rage. I don't care how big or scary anyone is. I don't have time for drama like that, so I just keep backing up until I'm a safe enough distance and then start walking away. But as I'm walking, I hear this horrible, distinctive click-clack that has me stopping dead in my tracks. The guy tells me to turn around, and my worst fears are confirmed. He has a gun pointed right at me, and he's telling me not to move. I've never been so scared in all my freaking life. Like I legitimately couldn't stop myself from shaking as the guy launches into a tirade about how his house has been targeted for burglary and blah blah blah. How the cops won't help. How guys like him need to take the law into their own hands. I sympathized. I totally did. I had my bike stolen when I was 12 by a kid that lived on my block. I had to watch him ride that thing around for weeks before he trashed it one day and just tossed it into the river. That guy was obviously at breaking point, ready to snap. The problem was he was about to snap on me and not an actual criminal. Thankfully, he calmed down a little, and after promising I'd never walk around that neighborhood at night anymore, he finally sobers up, lowers the gun, and lets me walk away. People make a big deal out of bad neighborhoods and how you shouldn't walk through them at night. But no one tells you about the good neighborhoods, because let me tell you, they can be just as dangerous.
It was back in the summer of 1974, and I was 16 years old at the time. I had just attended a concert in the city with my friends Dave and John. The three of us were catching a train home. We had got off at our stop, and we began walking home down the main road, chatting about the concert and still buzzing from the cool vibes. It was around 12 a.m. and we were crossing at a main intersection. There wasn't much traffic around this time of night, and as we crossed the road, we suddenly noticed a beat-up brown-colored station wagon stop in the middle of the intersection right near us. His window was down and the driver was around 25 to 30 years old, and although he looked a little dodgy, we just assumed he was going to ask for directions, and so we just stood there waiting to see what this guy wanted, completely unaware of the sheer terror that was about to follow. In that very moment, the guy pulled out a pistol from his lap, and what he uttered next still gives me shivers to this day. He said in a calm tone,
"Who wants it first?"
We just froze in absolute shock and terror, and it took a few seconds for all the reality of this to finally sink in. We didn't even have time to exchange a look, and we all hightailed it across the intersection. As our footsteps thundered across the road, the sound of gunshots filled the air as we ran for those bushes. I was absolutely terrified, waiting for that bullet to hit me or one of my friends in the back. As we ran further into the park and mustered up the courage to look back, we could no longer see the car and breathed a sigh of relief. We all just stood there trying to get our breath back. Luckily, we all knew the area pretty well, and we decided to continue along the old gravel road that we knew would take us back towards our homes. As we walked down the path, our conversation was pretty minimal, as we were too preoccupied of the thoughts of what had just happened and how lucky we were. However, that feeling of relief didn't last very long. As we got near the end of the gravel road, I could make out a car at the very end, and I started to wonder to myself, could that be the guy? We kept walking, but then just like out of a scary movie, the car flicked on its headlights and started revving its engine, and under the dim lights of the street, my heart began to sink as I then realized it was the brown station wagon. We knew he could see us. He was waiting for us, taunting us. He must know these streets well and where each of the different roads would lead. Well, we didn't waste another second. We took off once again and jumped the fence of a neighboring house. We didn't stop, we just kept running and jumping all of the fences. I glanced toward the road many times and I would see his car screaming past. Each time we made it to a main road, we would see his car appear again and once again speed towards us, and we dove over fences and tried to find another way. This happened about 2 or 3 more times after that. Around 1:30 a.m., we got down the end of another side road, and we couldn't see at the time, but the fence we jumped was covered in barbed wire, and it tore our clothes as we slid down. I let out a few groans as it grazed my arm. We were now in some kind of paddock-type area, and we could faintly hear the screeches of his tires racing around trying to find us. We just stood there crouching in the dark, breathing heavily, standing in cow manner, but we didn't care. We probably crouched for about 15 minutes or so, just waiting in the dark. Figuring by now he must be gone, we made our way back onto the main road. We kept our eyes peeled and kept glancing over our shoulders, and as the headlights appeared in the distance on many occasions, we each stopped breathing for a second, wondering in anticipation whether or not it was going to be the brown station wagon. We didn't see him again after that, and around 3 a.m. we walked my friend John home. Dave came back to mind for a bit so we could talk more calmly about our experience. Dave went home later that night. What was only meant to be a 20-minute walk home turned into that I will never forget. What was even more scary was a week or so later, I heard on the news that an elderly lady was shot by a random stranger one late night not too far from where this happened. Whether it was the same guy or not, I'll never know. All I really know is that my friends and I were incredibly lucky to escape that night. I live in a relatively safe area in Scotland, though I've had several really odd and scary experiences since I moved here about 4 years ago. I'm a short 29-year-old woman and I work in a pub, so I often get out of work quite late. I never wear my headphones when headed home at night, so this particular night was no different than usual. Alarm set, doors locked and checked, then said goodbye to my colleague and then went our separate ways to get home. I usually cross a grocery store car park to get home, and that night something struck me as odd. There were a couple of cars parked there, which is normal, but something just felt off this time. I looked over my shoulder and I clocked a guy in a hat walking a distance behind me. This wasn't weird, but I decided to keep an eye on him nonetheless. I exited the car park to the main road that I lived off of, but still had a good mile or so to go before I finally reached my flat. I checked over my shoulder again, and sure enough, the guy was walking in the same direction as me. The distance between us was starting to close, so I decided to cross the road. Looking over my shoulder, I was able to not only look for traffic coming, but I was also able to keep an eye on him. I crossed the road and didn't bother to look back for another few minutes, assuming he had stayed on the other side. But I began to hear footsteps approaching. I glanced over my shoulder and saw this guy was about 20 feet behind me. I had a soft drink in a glass bottle in my bag, and figuring I was overacting but better safe than sorry, I stuck my hand into my bag and gripped the bottle. Another 45 seconds and this guy was close enough to touch me, but he slows to my pace and then says,
Hello there, how are you?
I ignored him and I don't respond. I long ago gave up on pretenses of being polite if I feel uncomfortable. If I'm feeling uncomfortable, I really don't care about a stranger's feelings. But he persists in talking to me.
Hi there, are you going to work today?
No. I was being short with him.
Are you going home?
Yes, I said coldly. Do you live in this direction? I just looked at him, and he tried again.
Do you live off this road? Where do you live? Do you live close by?
I don't respond to him, and I slowed my pace, letting him walk on. I was still gripping the glass bottle, ready to hit him with it should he try anything. He tried to slow down so that I would catch up with him, but I slowed down so much that I was barely walking. He was maybe 300 yards away at this point and simply stopped and turned around, watching me and waiting for me to catch up with him. I reached into my pocket with my free hand and tried to get my phone. Of course, my phone was dead. I figured it would last the walk home, but the dodgy battery had other ideas. Surprisingly though, I wasn't really afraid. He had started walking again, but again, still quite slowly. He looked over his shoulder again after another minute, and I seized the opportunity. There was a path to a block of flats that was obscured by tall hedges, so I leaped behind them. I waited for nearly 10 minutes, never letting go of that bottle the whole time. I peeked around the hedges to make sure he was there. I peeked behind bins and bus stops to make sure he wasn't hiding, but as far as I could tell, I had lost him. Maybe he didn't mean anything by this, but if you suspect a woman is afraid of you and she's walking alone at night, don't speak to her. It won't help. And especially don't ask her where she lives repeatedly. I wasn't drunk. I didn't appear to be drunk or need any help. I was just walking home like I usually would. I am, however, inclined to believe that he had bad intentions. I would rather be too cautious than not. So did that creepy dude who seemed to be following me home that night screw off?
My name is Courtney, and I was 23 years old when this happened. I worked at a McDonald's right near my house. In order to get to my house, or to my work, you have to pass by a public park. I always carry pepper spray on me in case anything happens to me. I've been working at McDonald's for a few months now, and whenever I would work, I would always pass by the park, and nothing has ever happened. Until this one night. It was a Wednesday, I believe, and I had just gotten off from work. It was around 11 p.m. and I was starting to walk home. The reason why I walked from work to home is because my house is close by, so there's no need to drive. Anyway, while I was walking, I looked behind me for whatever reason, and I saw a man in all black following me. I thought nothing of it and just simply kept walking. I looked behind me once more, and this time, I could tell that he was walking a bit faster. I walked faster too, hoping that this guy would go away. I felt like he could put his hand on me at any moment, so I had my hand on my pepper spray just in case. And then, it happened. I felt a hand cover my mouth and another hand grab my neck. I screamed and took out my pepper spray and sprayed the man in the eyes, and he fell to the ground. I ran home while the man lied on the ground screaming in pain. I finally came home and went inside almost out of breath. But unfortunately, it didn't end there. My parents weren't home, and when I went to look out of my bedroom window, I saw the man across the street looking right at me. He then ran off into the darkness, and I never saw him again. My name is Matthew, and this is the most horrifying experience I've ever had. This was something straight out of a horror movie. I lived in a rural town in California and worked at a local Domino's. I have to walk past some woods in order to get to my house. I've been working at Domino's since I was 17 and I am now 19. I have also been walking past the woods and nothing strange has ever happened to me. Until today. So my shift at Domino's ended at 7:30, a bit later than my normal time I get out. So I'm walking and I could see the woods maybe a few miles up ahead. Finally, I get to the woods and I'm on the side of the road. To get a better idea of where I was, imagine a road and trees on both sides. Now, there are barely any cars or people on the road at this time. Keep in mind that it's getting dark and you only have very little light, so it really added to the creepiness. Anyway, as I was walking, I thought I could hear something coming from the trees. I looked, but I didn't see anything. I continued walking when a rock was thrown at me and landed right in front of me. I then turned around and looked to the trees and I could see someone waving at me. It was dark, so I couldn't see who it was or how they looked. I asked, hey, do you need something? He responded in a loud whisper and said, "Hey, come over here. I want to show you something." I told him that I had to get home and that I couldn't be late. He responded saying, "Oh, don't worry, it will only take a second. I really need your help with something." I told him I'll help, but I only had a minute. He said a minute is all it will take. I took a deep breath and walked over to him. He said that he found a man-made hole dug in the ground and wanted to see what was down there and that he didn't have a light. I told him I would shine my light with my iPhone down there to take a look. Doing that was the biggest mistake I've ever done. I walked over and stood by the hole with the man behind me. Before I was about to shine the light, the man pushed me down the hole. I fell about 20 feet and landed on something soft. I started cussing and screaming at the man, but I didn't see him. I stood up and I could feel the soft thing I was on. I had to see what I was standing on. I shined the flashlight on my phone and shined it down. I felt like my whole world had been shattered. The light revealed the body. It was a naked woman who looked to be about 20 and she had been killed. She had cuts everywhere on her body. I stayed down there for a good half hour before finally managing to climb out and run home. I didn't tell my parents about what I saw. I only told a few of my closest friends. For a bit of background story. At the time, I lived in a city in a not-so-great area in South Texas. I was walking home from a friend's house since my mom wanted me home by 10. To get to my house, you have to go through a tunnel. I've been through the tunnel before, and nothing too strange has ever happened. I mean, you would see maybe some people doing drugs or something, but nothing too major. However, this night was absolutely horrifying. I was walking through the tunnel when I heard someone falling behind me. It was some guy. There were some dimly lit lights in the tunnel so I could see him. He then started to walk faster towards me, and when all of a sudden he came to my right and said, "Hey, you're really pretty. You want to hang out sometime?" This guy looked to be about 30, and I was 18 at the time, so I politely told him that I was only 18 and that I had a boyfriend. He responded and completely ignored what I said. He said, "So, can I have your number?" I told him no and to please leave me alone. He seemed to get the hint, and so he walked back. While I was walking, I could see the end of the tunnel that would turn onto my street. Then, I felt two hands grab around my neck and squeeze tight. I tried punching the man, and he let go of my neck and tried to grab my hands, but I managed to cut him with my pocket knife. He then fell to the ground and screamed in pain. I ran as fast as I could out of the tunnel and onto my street. I then lost him and walked to my house. When I got inside, I fell to the floor, bawling my eyes out. I explained to my parents and they called the police, but they couldn't find the guy. I now carry pepper spray on me, and my boyfriend sometimes walks with me through the tunnel. I haven't seen that man since, and I hope I never do.
Christmas is a time of year to be happy, merry, and joyful, at least for most people. I love spreading cheer to family and friends on Christmas. My joyful mood usually translates to my coworkers as well. I work in customer service, which many people know can be a nightmare at Christmas time, so it helps to try and stay upbeat. Well, on this specific Christmas Eve, customers were doing some final Christmas shopping before Christmas Day. Right at the end of my shift, I cashed out a pretty normal-looking guy. I would say the average height range of like 5'7" and maybe 150 pounds. He had parted black hair, glasses, and was probably in his mid-40s. He was buying some fairly normal stuff and not really anything Christmas-related. The whole interaction was mostly friendly until the very end when I said something I now wish I didn't say. I ended our transaction by saying in my bubbly voice, "Thank you, sir, and have a happy holiday." He stopped and turned back to me and said, "What did you just say?" I responded nervously and semi-confused, "Have a happy holiday?" He stormed back to my register and screamed at the top of his lungs, "It's Merry Christmas!" I backed away in a slight panic and just said, "Okay, sir, I'm sorry." He walked away mumbling to himself, but I could tell he was furious by his recent actions. For a couple of minutes I kept staring outside, and I could see him pacing in front of the store, still seemingly mumbling to himself. A few people actually came into the store and said that there was someone outside talking about Christmas and Jesus' birthday. I began to panic, thinking this guy was going to come into the store again or wait until I got out and try to follow me home or something. Well, luckily for me, my boyfriend worked at the same store, and he was driving us to my mom's house for a Christmas Eve party at the end of the night. We left shortly after 6, and at first I was relieved when I didn't see the man outside. We were almost to my boyfriend's car when we saw the man running after us from the side of the store. My boyfriend opened up the backseat door so I could hop in, and he stood there in front of the car. My boyfriend said in a stern voice, "Hey, is there a problem, man?" The man, still in a rage, said, "That lady has no respect for Jesus or Christmas, and she should be punished." My boyfriend, confused, told the man to back away and leave us alone, and the crazy man actually tried to jump past my boyfriend to get into the car to punish me or whatever that meant. My boyfriend slammed the guy down to the ground and got into the car, and we drove off. Like fools, we decided on the drive not to call 911 because we didn't want to bother them on Christmas Eve, so we thought, and just wanted to forget the event. On December 26th, we did alert our store manager of the situation so we could call the police if the guy ever came back into the store. I still work at the store, and almost a year later, I have never seen that man again. I can say for certainty that I will never say happy holidays again.
This happened 9 years ago. I had just ended a 4-year relationship and had moved into an old building in downtown Paris. I had to start all over again from scratch. Well, I did the mistake to let my ex-girlfriend keep a lot of my furniture, kitchen cutlery, pans, coffee machine, etc. At the time, I had worked as a waiter, so I could only afford a one-room apartment from a council estate building. It was really old and barely even clean, but at least I had a roof over my head. The first 2 weeks, nothing had happened, but quickly, I began to hear someone talking at night. It was kind of like mumblings. It basically said, "Just go and die already." When I looked into the door Judah, I saw a scrawny, shirtless guy smiling and scratching the door with his finger. This became a thing every 2 or 3 nights. He would come and threaten me through the door, or sing songs with a really childish voice. I thought about opening the door and asking him what he wanted, but I was afraid that he had a knife or something, and I couldn't see his hands while looking into the door Judah. What really stunned me is that he acted totally normal whenever I stumbled upon him during the day, and he actually denied being the one to do this at night. I even got mad at him for it, but he seemed to genuinely not understand what the hell I was talking about. One day I came home with a girl that I'd met at a bar that I was working at. For some reason, she had left during the night, and I went back to sleep. The mumbling started again, only this time, it felt really close. I opened my eyes, only to witness the scrawny neighbor now headbutting the wall and singing what sounded like a mix between religious chants and also a lullaby in slow motion. I was honestly totally paralyzed by the fear. I tried to communicate with him, but he was just grinning, and he ended up exiting the apartment by himself. I decided I had enough, and finally decided to call the police. They took him in all right, and he ended up getting put into a psych ward. Apparently this guy had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he was put in a psychiatric hospital because of it. He wasn't supposed to live at his place anymore. He had apparently ran away from the hospital 2 months ago. He initially got sent into the psych ward after bashing a shovel into a postman's head, putting him into a coma. He did that for absolutely no reason at all. I never saw him again, and I moved out 2 years after that. I'm a 25-year-old female, and I had just bought my first home in December of 2019 in West Michigan. The neighborhood seemed quiet and safe, which I was pleased with, being that I live alone with only my dog to keep me company. Having a degree in social work and recently interning at the county jail has made me a bit jaded when it comes to local crime and the overall darker side of civilization. I've met quite a few of the surrounding neighbors, many of which are on the older side, and they all seem pleasant. But of course, there's always that one loopy neighbor that has to ruin it. About a month after I moved in there was a knock at my door. I answered, and there was a man around his late 50s to early 60s waiting there. As I opened the door, he introduced himself. We'll call him John. John had a beard and was a little on the hefty side, and smelled of cigarettes, but overall looked like a pretty normal dude for his age. He told me he lived a few doors down and he had welcomed me to the neighborhood and said that he's a good handyman, so if I ever needed anything, I could let him know. I thanked him, and I thought it was nice to know that I had someone I could go to help for if there was an emergency. He asked if I lived with anyone, and I said no, that it was just me. It struck me as slightly odd that he would ask, but I figured I was just being paranoid. As the conversation ended, John said, "You know, you're a really beautiful girl." "Yeah, very pretty." And he smiled at me. I smiled back and thanked him, although shivers had run down my spine. After he left, I thought about his comment for a while. Had he been a decade or two older, it may have come off as more of a cute thing that an elderly man might say to a younger woman, but the way he said it struck me as quite odd. As the months passed, we casually waved to each other as neighbors normally do, but I didn't directly speak to him again until just a few weeks ago, almost 1 year after our first conversation. I was raking leaves in the front yard, and I had my dog tied up to a tree so they could lay outside in the sun and watch me. My dog, whose name is Newton, is a mid-sized mixed breed of what I believe to be a border collie and some type of shepherd. I got him from a local shelter when he was just a pup. He's a real cutie, and he's very gentle and calm around me, but he can be quite protective, and he isn't always the fondest of males that he isn't familiar with. While I was raking the leaves, John comes over on his riding mower and starts to mow the unfinished side of my lawn. I was a little annoyed because I was right in the midst of learning how to take care of fall leaves for the first time, but I didn't let this show and just continued finishing up my patch. After he finished, he had hopped off the mower and he walked over to me and Newton. Newton's tail was wagging, but it was apparent that he was also a bit on edge. John and I spoke for a moment, and I thanked him. Then John turns to Newton, and he puts his hand out. Newton sniffs his hand, and he begins to growl a bit. As I'm attempting to hush him, John proceeds to swat at his face in a playful gesture. Not a smart move to pretend to smack a dog who's visibly unsure of you. Newton then breaks out in an episode of nervous barking. Embarrassed and not wanting to annoy the other neighbors, I try and console Newton. Then to my surprise, this grown adult man gets down on his hands and knees in a child's pose position right in front of Newton and actually begins to whimper like a dog. I stared in disbelief, praying that no one else was watching this horribly awkward moment taking place. My eyes quickly dart to each surrounding house looking for witnesses, and then stop on a woman that's watching us intently from John's side of the fence. John eventually gets up from the grass, and he told me about his own dogs, and that he also lives with his ex-wife in her basement. He went into all kinds of details about their marriage and how it didn't work out because he liked to party, and she was more of a homebody. I assumed that his ex-wife was the woman who had been watching us interact from their yard. Before he left, though, he had told me that he was moving out in the spring, but that he would be around in the upcoming winter to snowblow my driveway if I'd like, for $50 each time. I told him that I'd let him know, although I thought to myself that $50 was a bit steep for such a small driveway. After this conversation, I saw him once again last week when I brought my trash out. I saw him out of the corner of my eye waving to me from his driveway, but ignored him, not wanting to invite him into conversation as I was leaving for work soon. While walking back to my garage, I had heard him yell, "Hey there!" So I had no choice but to turn and give him a quick wave and nod. Aside from the whole whimpering like a sad puppy thing, he just generally gave me the creeps. And earlier today, my impression of him being an outright weirdo was reinforced. I was walking Newton around the block in the late afternoon. I started to shovel quickly when I came across John's house, hoping he wouldn't be outside, but of course he was, as he always coincidentally seems to be outside when I am. He yelled hello to me as he very swiftly walked out from his garage, and I very reluctantly paused by his mailbox and greeted him. "I broke my wrist," he sputtered out. I looked to see his right wrist was in a cast. "Oh no, how did that happen?" I asked. "I don't know," John said. I wondered how a person could totally be unaware of how they broke a bone. "I guess I'm just old. I'm probably about the same age as your dad, right?" John asked. "Yeah, probably pretty close," I replied. He then did his usual thing where he talks about things that I couldn't possibly care less about, like about his new glasses and how he was also in the military, so he was able to get free gear from the VFW. He stuck out his hand to Newton again, and I had to remind him that Newton wasn't really fond of men that he didn't know that well. He offered to get Newton a bone, but I shrugged off the idea, not really wanting to prolong our conversation. "You know, we're supposed to get some snow over the weekend," John said. "Yeah, I heard about 6 inches. I replied shortly. I really loathe small talk, and I'm really horrible at faking interest in topics like the weather. "Yeah, well, I'll snowball your driveway for you if you want. I do Margie's driveway there in that brown house," John then says as he points across the street. "Oh yeah? You said it'll be around $50, right?" I asked. I misspoke the last time we talked about it. We could work something out. Maybe $25 or whatever you can pay. I know times are tough because of the pandemic and whatnot. Or instead, we could fool around or something." John stammered. I was a bit quiet for a moment, just trying to process his proposition, and I thought that there was no way I heard him correctly, or that he meant that in a sexual manner. "Yeah, I'll let you know, I guess," I said nervously. "So, do you have a boyfriend?" John asked. "No," I answered. I immediately kicked myself mentally for not telling him yes. I'm a horrible liar, though. It doesn't come to me naturally, which can really suck in these types of situations where it could be useful. Well, do you want one? John asked further. Not really, I replied, laughing out of discomfort. Hey, by the way, thanks for waving at me the other day. That was nice of you. I was trying to get your attention, and I didn't think you saw me, John said. Yeah, no problem, I said, wondering why a wave meant so much to him. John began to speak about something else, and to be honest, I don't really remember what he said, because I was so wrapped up in trying to figure out his motive behind his last few comments. I ended up telling him to have a nice day, and started to walk away. So yeah, just let me know about the snow blowing. If you can't pay me with cash, we can just fool around, and I would count that as even, he said from behind me, confirming his intentions. Yeah, I don't know about that, I said sarcastically, not turning in his direction as I continued back home. Oh, okay. Well, no big deal, John said in a weirdly friendly manner. I didn't respond, and the rest of the walk home I became pissed. Pissed that I didn't tell him I had a boyfriend or tell him to stay the hell away from me. Pissed at how he was so nonchalant and direct, and assuming that there was even a sliver of chance that I would be down to basically prostitute myself for what? A 40-minute shovel job? Pissed that I now feel uncomfortable inside and outside of my first home that I've worked so hard for. Pissed that so many young women, as well as men, are put in similar situations, or far, far worse. I'm sure there will be more to this story, seeing as I think he's going to try and clear my driveway this weekend without me even asking for his help. But for now, I'm just going to go to sleep with a knife right next to my bed. I'm also going to invest in some blinds for my bedroom, which faces direction, and I really hope he'll still be moving away in the spring, like he said he was. My parents were born in 1952. Their first child, my sister Janie, was born early in 1958. The story takes place at the very beginning of 1959. Now, my father was away on business, and I wouldn't be born until very late in 1960. So my mother and my infant sister are home at the time, and they're both having really bad bouts of the flu. My mom decides to call her mother to come and help her. Now, it's in the middle of the night. My mom, dad, and sister lived in New York City, Manhattan. Grandma lived in Queens and Flushing. So my mom calls her mom, and she asks her to get a cab and come into the city. Grandma says sure, okay. So enough time goes by for Grandma to arrive. My mom then hears a weird scratching sound on her front door. She's a little spooked, and she says, "Mom, is that you? If that's you, why don't you ring the doorbell?" There was no response other than more scratching. Now my mom is really spooked, but asks once more, "Mom, is that you? Whoever it is, if I don't get an answer right now, I'm calling the police." And then just more scratching at the door. So as you can imagine, my mom picks up the telephone and then dials, I guess in the late 1950s, just the operator, since there was no 911 yet. "Hello, my name's Miss O'Donnell. Someone's scratching at my front door, and they're not answering when I ask them to identify themselves." The operator then says they'll send a car over. The cops arrive fast. They find outside the door a very old man in his pajamas, barefoot too. He was a neighbor, and he lived on another floor with two of his daughters. He had some kind of senility or Alzheimer's and had gotten out somehow, and his only crime was trying to find his way home. It's honestly kind of sad when you think about it. He was really, really lucky that he had picked my mom's door to try and get into. Any other apartment, and no one would have heard him, and he would have gone outside in bare feet. And it was like single digits outside at the time, midwinter, and like 3 o'clock in the morning. His daughters came down the next day and had thanked my mom for saving him, and apologized profusely for their dad disturbing her.
My next-door neighbor was the best you could dream of. She worked nights, and when she was off, rarely made a peep. Her little dog was a concern early on, but I would soon discover it was as quiet as its owner. I'd been at the complex for a year when she told me she found a boyfriend and things were going well. After that, I saw her even less than before and was more than happy to sign another 12-month lease. Things proved to be too good to be true, however. Barely a month into my second year, things began to change drastically next door. Loud arguments were often heard through the walls, and the dog reacted to these as badly as I did. The poor little guy barked his head off while she and the new love of her life screamed at each other repeatedly. I did attempt to ignore the racket for a couple of weeks, but would finally lose my mind and began banging on the wall. I was shocked that it worked, but only the first time. All the others after were ignored. This garbage went on for over 3 months, and after several visits from the cops, she showed up at my door to apologize. She claimed things were going well, just as she had told me prior, but after he moved in, his behavior changed. After that, it seemed all they would do is fight. He had hit her during one, and she foolishly forgave him. He'd sworn it would never happen again, but it did, and she kicked him out. Her hope was that he'd move on to someone else. However, he soon appeared at her door out of the blue, begging her to take him back. The cops were called, and she filed a restraining order. That was almost a month ago, and she hoped he was gone for good. From what I could see and hear, things had gone back to the way they had been originally. I went back to living a peaceful life, and I assumed so had she. Considering we had opposite schedules, it wasn't strange for us to go weeks without seeing or hearing one another, and I was happy for it to stay that way. Then something terrifying would happen one day as I returned from work. I pulled into the complex and turned to enter my section of the lot and was blocked by several cop cars and ambulances. It was a surprising thing to see, but none of my business, I suppose. I found another spot to park and headed for my apartment. As I neared my place, I noticed my neighbor's door was wide open and cops were going in and out. After what she'd told me, I assumed her ex had showed up uninvited. Upon approaching our building, another officer stopped me and informed me the area was closed. I let him know I lived in the building and asked what had happened. He couldn't tell me, but if I waited for a detective to come out, he'd probably have some questions for me. The cop said something over his radio, and a minute later, a guy in a suit came out of the apartment and took me aside. He only had a few questions, if I'd seen anything and the like. As the seconds passed, I got increasingly nervous and begged him to tell me what was going on. He paused and said in a very serious voice that my neighbor had been found dead in her apartment earlier that day. My eyes had to have looked like saucers to him. I was completely shocked and wondered how I hadn't noticed something so major. Before he could ask the question, I blurted out her ex's name. They were familiar with him, and I could tell from his demeanor he was their main suspect. He handed me his card and let me go. I turned to walk away, but stopped a few steps later. What's going to happen to her dog? The detective hesitated, and a sad look popped up on his face. The assailant appears to have killed him too. I'm sorry. I'm not sure why this angered me so much. Struck me as needless, I guess. The cops probably thought I was crazy, mumbling cuss words under my breath as I walked away. The following morning I was browsing through the local paper online and came across a story about the murder. It explained that my neighbor was a week late on her rent and received a notice. When no reply came after 2 days, the manager visited the apartment personally. There was no answer, even after she knocked, so she let herself in and found the body. The detective was quoted as saying that they had yet to find her ex, and they believed that he had fled back to his original home in Lebanon. Not much information has come out since then. The ex-boyfriend is still unlocated, and no other suspects exist at this time. I've moved on to a different apartment complex now, but for the remainder of my time in that one, things went back to business as usual. 2 months before my lease was up, new tenants moved in. This was a young couple with a 5-year-old boy. The noise coming from them was endless, and I was overjoyed when the time came for me to move. The place I'm now in is majority older couples, and the noise level is almost non-existent. As nice as things are at present, I don't believe I'll ever have a neighbor as good as her. Anytime I hear a bang on my ceiling or loud talking through the walls, I think back on her and how great of a woman and neighbor she was.
This is less of a creepy one-person encounter and more of a whole community creeped out by one man. The neighbor in question is somewhat famous for his lawn, an impossibly thick green landscape that he had tended by a company. I'm vaguely aware of him losing it on the landscapers, screaming at them outside. Enough I knew he had a temper. The first real red flag that he might be legit crazy came last summer. He asked a teenage boy in the neighborhood to check in on the house once a day and make sure all the doors and windows were secured and water their flowers. The day they left, though, he left a crazy list, saying the kid had to be there multiple times a day, turning off and on different sets of lights at specific times, and leaving weird chores for him. Also, the kid was not allowed to walk on the lawn, and he had to remove his dirty shoes before walking on the concrete sidewalk. He was never to enter the house, but was to turn off and on the lights from the doorway by means of a stick with a loop on it. Also, he was not allowed to use the garden hose to water the lawn, and had to instead use a teeny tiny watering can. The letter implied that my neighbor would have the kid under surveillance and would have pictures if he failed to comply. Basically, the kid's parents called him and said they weren't comfortable with the situation anymore, and while they would keep an eye on the house, the deal was off. They argued over the phone. When my neighbor got back from vacation, it was early morning, and he immediately went to their house, woke them, and tried to pick a fight with them. One of the other neighbors is a retired colonel and came out to see what was going on and tried to settle the issue. Crazy neighbor said that he would let it rest if he was allowed to bare-ass spank the kid. He flipped out when they told him hell no. Sometime after this, another neighbor was at the grocery store when he was concerned by Crazy Neighbor. Crazy Neighbor apparently just talked at him in rapid fire for a half hour. Among other things, he started saying how wives shouldn't have friends, and said that his wife's sister was so fat she broke the toilet seat last time she visited. After this, everyone started talking about how you don't see his wife anywhere. Occasionally she will be out watering flowers, but while her husband is seen out, she isn't. Considering that she used to be a social butterfly, this is weird. During the winter, everyone found pamphlets on their mailbox from the landscaper he uses, along with a note saying it was mandatory to now use this landscaper in our area, and failure to comply will result in being sued. We are private, single-family homes with no homeowners association, so this is patently untrue. During the winter, someone saw his wife and her arm was in a sling and she had a black eye. When they went to ask her about it, he wouldn't let her speak and said she had slid on ice. Since then, there have been a few attempts made to talk to her alone, and all have failed. They've gone so far as to get their church involved and to call a welfare check by the cops when he was out of the house. But if she is being abused, she has been refusing help. Snow was bad this year, and he blew a fit about the snowplows piling snow on his property. So he scattered screws on the roadway outside before they came one morning. Then someone in the neighborhood got a puppy. It's quiet and has a fenced-in backyard. Its owners wake up in the middle of the night to the doorbell ringing. When they come out, Crazy Neighbor is standing on the road at the edge of the property. He tells them that the first time the dog gets out, they won't have a dog anymore, and he pulls out a gun and waves it around before pointing it towards the backyard and saying, "Bang." Obviously, they go back inside and call the cops. When confronted, Crazy Neighbor claims he was out for a walk thought they were awake and stopped by. He says he didn't get the gun out, but it had been on his belt, and that he didn't mean his statement as a threat. He ended up getting some sort of citation from the police. Come spring, he is taken to sitting outside and writing something every time someone walks or drives by. We don't know what, but I have taken to driving differently home to avoid going by him. Most recently, someone put up a swing set in their backyard. They came back from work to find tire tracks through the backyard and the swing set run over and crushed. No one saw anything, but his massive truck happens to have the same kind of tires as the tread arcs left behind. The retired colonel has taken to compiling statements from everyone and keeping records, because we think this is going to end badly.
When I was 30 years old, I had saved enough money to buy my first house. It wasn't anything special, and honestly, all things considered, it wasn't in the best neighborhood either. But I was still proud of the accomplishment nonetheless. I'd met all the nearby neighbors in, I'd say, the first 2 weeks I moved in. Considering the neighborhood, I was surprised to discover they all actually seemed pretty nice. A couple of them even invited me over for dinner a few times. And having lived in different apartments all my life, this wasn't really something I was used to. Of course, they weren't all like this, however. 2 houses down from the house I moved into lived a man that was probably 50 years old. Upon moving in, every other night or so the dude would knock at my front door at some absurd hour asking for stuff. So, like, as an example, the first time it happened, he asked me if I had any spare bread I wasn't gonna eat. Another time, he asked me if I could fill up a bucket with water, because his was turned off. It was just random, but somewhat understandable things like that. But I drew the line when he started asking me for money. I figured I had no obligation to be constantly meeting this guy's needs. I mean, I had pretty much just met the dude. I had started opening the door to his knocks less and less, but this didn't seem to have any effect on the number of times he would show up. Fast forward to a night a few weeks later, and again another knock. I planned to ignore it, like I had grown accustomed to doing by that point. But as I looked through the people, I noticed the guy looked distressed. Seeing this, I decided the right thing to do would be to open up the door. So I did. I asked him what he needed, and what he responded with was not at all the type of response I was expecting. He asked me if I could come over and show him how to use his new grill. Now, this happened around midnight, which in my opinion was an extremely odd time to start grilling. But against my better judgment, I decided I would help him. I was pretty into cooking at that point in my life, and figured taking 10 minutes to show the guy how a grill worked wouldn't be the end of the world. I told him that I'd be over in a second, and that I just needed to put some shoes on. He thanked me and started walking back. A couple minutes later, and I made my way over to his house. I opened some gate and walked into his backyard. It was dark, so it was hard to see, but it was clear there was no grill. On top of that, the guy was nowhere in sight. Although his back door was wide open, I stuck my head inside and yelled out for the guy. "Yeah, I'm down here. I need your help getting some meat from the freezer." The muffled response came from down a set of stairs just to the left of me. I was hesitant to go down. There were no lights on down there. In fact, there wasn't a single light on throughout the whole house. I yelled down the stairs, asking him if he could turn on a light so I could see. There was silence for a few seconds. Eventually he responded. "No, they're broken. I can't do that." I knew something was off at that point. I yelled back something like, "I think I'm just gonna go, man." I kid you not, the second after I said this, audible footsteps started sprinting up the stairs. My flight reaction kicked in immediately. I ran directly back to my house and locked the door behind me. I pulled back a set of curtains and looked out one of my windows, but I didn't see anything. I was terrified. I thought about calling the police, but decided against it, figuring I really wouldn't be able to prove anything that just happened. For the next few days, I didn't leave my house for anything except work. During those days, I never saw the guy, nor did any late-night knocks occur. Exactly 1 week after it happened, I was talking with my neighbor across the street. The conversation eventually landed on what I experienced, and how I was planning to move because of it. But I was just met with a look of confusion. I was then informed that no one lived in the house I was talking about. It had been abandoned for 2 years. This prompted my neighbor to call the police. However, the police would find nothing inside or around the house. I moved out a few weeks later, so that's all I know. I'm not sure if anything else came from the situation or not. I still don't know who that guy was, or what he was trying to lure me into.
My name is Shelly, and 10 years ago, I wanted to make my own money because I was tired of asking my parents for money. I put in a lot of applications and I ended up getting hired at Chick-fil-A. I'm not going to lie, I was definitely excited because of all of the chicken nuggets I was going to be eating. Anyways, after I got hired, I started to get the hang of the job. It was pretty easy. I worked outside in the drive-thru line a lot because we were the busiest fast food restaurant in our town, and people really liked my personality. After working there for a few months, my dad's creepy friend Tyler would come there every day at the same time and go to the same drive-thru line, which was weird because I worked there after school and there were 2 drive-thru lines. The drive-thru line he'd always go to was mine, and he would always call me Shell, which I've hated since I was a small kid. The thing is, he'd always order small stuff like a small fry or a small cookies and cream milkshake. A few times he came into the line, pull up to me, and then he'd say that he forgot his debit card, and he would just try and talk to me. I'm not dumb. I knew exactly what he was doing. Ever since I turned 13, he always acted weird toward me, telling me that I'm growing up into a woman, or that I look like a young woman now. There was this time when my parents were having a get-together with family and friends, and I yelled out to my parents that I had to pee, and I ran upstairs. I swear a few seconds later, Tyler burst through the door, looked at me and said, "Wow," and stared at me. Then he straightened up real quick and said, "Sorry, my bad," and closed the door. Like I said, he was weird. So we closed at 10 p.m., but we always take orders up until around 9:59. One day, we were inside cleaning up, and it was around 10:30 p.m. There were about 5 or 6 of us in Chick-fil-A at the time. I was mopping the floor and a few of us saw a car pull up to the drive-thru, but turned around at the entrance because we put cones out there after 10 p.m. The car drove around our parking lot at least 10 minutes, and I noticed that it had temporary tags on it. After a while, our manager went outside and went up to the car due to it stopping in front of one of our windows every time it drove around. I watched the manager walk to the car as the driver rolled down the window. The window was all the way down before my manager reached the car, and to my surprise, it was Tyler, my dad's friend. He had a new car that I didn't recognize, but what made this very weird was that even when he rolled the window down, he never looked at my manager. He was staring directly at me, talking with my manager. I was standing behind the entrance door. He saw me looking at him, looking at me, but he never turned away like a normal person would. My manager walked back in and told me and my coworkers to hurry up so we can get out of here. I was the last person to get done with my closing, so it was just me and my manager. My manager told me to make sure the doors are locked. I told him okay, then I went to the bathroom. I figured I'd lock them once I'm done. As usual, I was on my phone while using the bathroom, and the bathroom door opens. I thought it was weird because my manager is the only other person in the building, and he's a guy. I yelled out that he's an idiot and he's in the wrong bathroom, but the thing is, he never left. It got weirder because I can hear him breathing by the door, but then I heard, Shell, it's me, Tyler Poop. Are you in here?" I picked up my feet so he couldn't see them. But then he started to push open every stall door, saying my name. I texted my boss and it literally said, "Help, bathroom." Then Tyler got to my stall. He attempted to push the door open and then he laughed. He said that he knows that I'm in there. He looked in the crack of the door and said, "There you are." He then got down on his hands and knees, reached his hand under the door and attempted to unlock the stall. I kicked his arm and he said, "It's me, Uncle Tyler." As he said that, he proceeded to crawl under my stall door. I started to climb above my stall, then my manager burst through the door as I was screaming and crying. Tyler and my manager began to fight. I called the cops. After a few seconds, Tyler was unconscious on the bathroom floor. When the cops and the EMS got there, he was cuffed and loaded up into the ambulance. He was hit with a few charges and was recently released from jail. That situation just heightened my awareness of my surroundings. It was Halloween of 2012, and I was closing at work, which is Chick-fil-A. We were a new establishment in the area that we're in, and the neighborhood was pretty bad. In and out all afternoon and evening, I saw hundreds of people dressed in their costumes. All of the cliche costumes, Jason, Freddy Krueger, and Michael Myers. At around 7:30, there was a long line inside, and out of nowhere there was some commotion. My manager came out to break it up. When he broke it up, some guy in the Ghostface costume from Scream ran out of the door. That person that ran out of the door got into it with a woman that was dressed as Meg from Family Guy. At least that's what I thought she was, until she told us that she wasn't in costume. She was just ugly. Anyway, this woman told our manager and the cops that some person in a Ghostface costume tried to lure her 7-year-old daughter out of the building to his car. The little girl was running back and forth between her mother, who was in line, and the play area inside. I guess the man in the Scream costume told the girl that her mom told her to wait in his car, and he grabbed her. The mom turned around and saw it. Then she started to yell and scream. A few hours later, we locked the doors, and then some guy knocked at our drive-through window. He had on a Ghostface costume from the movie Scream, but I don't know if it was the same guy from earlier. I yelled out that we're closed, and this guy tries to bust through the drive-through window. I screamed, and the manager ran out, and then that man ran to our front door banging. Then he stopped and just stared at us. At that point, it was just my manager and I. My manager called the cops, and the man left and popped his trunk of his car. He grabbed something out of his trunk and put it under his costume. He then walked back up to the front door. He stared for another 30 seconds and pulled out a gun from under his costume, aimed it, and pulled the trigger. We both ducked and screamed, but nothing happened. We looked up and he was fumbling with his gun. He was loading, unloading, and reloading. It had jammed. Then the cops showed up with their guns drawn. He got on the ground and they arrested this guy. We found out that this was a dangerous guy and he had a huge rap sheet, and we were pretty lucky that nothing happened to us that night. It may be cowardly, but I quit that job soon after that happened because of the neighborhood that Chick-fil-A was in.
I'm a female who used to work at Chick-fil-A when I was in my late teens and early 20s. Overall, it was a fun place to work and I made lots of friends. Everyone who worked there was super nice, which is why I stayed working there for so long. However, at one point we hired a new guy named Justin. From the day he started working there, Justin just seemed like a jerk. He was rude and selfish and would do things like go on his phone during shifts, take really long bathroom breaks, and leave early. I found out he was a relative to one of our managers, and as a favor to his family, she was able to get him a job. He was a somewhat troubled guy who had gotten into some problems before, but it was thought that the job would help him out. For the first few weeks, though, it didn't. For the most part, when I first met him, though, he was rather nice to me. Shortly after that, he asked me out during a shift, though. He basically asked what I was doing and if I wanted to hang out or go someplace with him. I really didn't want to and told him that I was busy. Over the next few times that we worked together, he remained persistent and would ask me to hang out after work or something like that almost every time. When I would say no or come up with excuses, he would seem to grow increasingly angry. I also heard from another female worker that he had been doing the same to her. He was a bigger guy, almost looked like a football player as he was over 6 feet tall with very short hair and strong looking. One night, he asked me to hang out after work because he saw me clocking out for my lunch break. I told him no again, but this time he grabbed my arm. He asked me why in a very serious and frustrated tone. I told him I was sorry, but I just really didn't want to. The way he aggressively grabbed me made me kind of worried, and I decided in that moment I would have to talk to my boss because I had really had enough of him. The rest of my shift was really busy, and as it was time for dinner, we had a big rush. I didn't get a chance to speak with my boss, Christine, and I even forgot about the situation. Finally, after things quieted down and we were no longer busy, my shift was over and it was time for me to go home. I clocked out and then got my coat and headed for my car. As I approached my car, I suddenly saw somebody jump out from behind it. Where I was parked, it was at the back side of the restaurant that was bordering a grassy area with a couple of trees. I saw the person who had jumped out was Justin. I was really surprised to see him. He said to me that I had no reason to dislike him and asked me what my problem was. I told him I really didn't have a problem with him, I just wanted to go home. He was standing blocking my driver's door, and I knew it would be hard for me to get around him. I asked him if he should get back to work. He then told me that he was off and he had been off for 2 hours just waiting for me. Obviously, this creeped me out even more. He then stepped towards me and grabbed my arm again. When he did, he shoved me in the opposite direction. There was a car parked 2 spaces away, and I guess it was his because I heard it unlock. He then shoved me to the car and told me to get inside. I asked him why. He said he just wanted to talk. When he said this, his voice seemed to lighten up. I figured maybe I could have an actual conversation with him and let him know he needed to leave me alone and these things are not okay. I reluctantly got inside the car. Justin shut the door and then walked around and got inside to the driver's seat. But instead of talking to me, he immediately started up the car and began backing out. He also locked all of the doors in the process. Right away, I got a terrible feeling. I asked him what he was doing. He said to shut up and then cursed at me. He then went on a short rant about how he hated working and how he had just quit. As he did this, the car started to speed up and he merged onto a busier road. I knew I was in trouble and took out my phone from my pocket and immediately went to dial 911. Justin saw me doing this, and I was just barely able to hit call on my phone. I could hear the ringing on the other end, but no more than a couple of seconds of this, and Justin reached over and grabbed my phone. He yelled at me and we wrestled over the phone for a couple of seconds. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to pull it away from him fast enough. He got control of my phone and then rolled down his window and tossed the phone out onto the side of the road. He then kept on driving. I was terrified. I knew that I could no longer call for help and decided that I had to try to think of something to do. Justin just kept on driving down the road at a really fast speed. None of us said a word for several minutes. I was just doing my best to think about what I could possibly do to try to escape. Then, suddenly I saw the amazing sight of flashing lights behind us. Justin started yelling and cursing, and eventually he pulled over. The police pulled over with him, and as soon as the car stopped, Justin opened his door and took off into the woods. I saw the police officer run after him, and I got out of the car. The officer told me to stay put, and then he called for backup. Eventually, more officers arrived, and a short time later, I heard that they had caught Justin after a foot chase. The police told me they had received a 911 call from my phone, and even though I didn't talk to anyone, they decided to investigate the area the call was made from. They only originally pulled over Justin because he was speeding, but after he took off running, they went after him. I was so grateful that I was all right and got out of that situation. After that, I took some time off of work and eventually returned to work there for a short time more.
Back when I was living on the streets, well, technically in my car, I would always post up by fast food restaurants because people would always give me their change or some of the food that they had recently purchased. One day I posted at the entrance of a plaza, and in that plaza the busiest place was a Chick-fil-A. Throughout the day I received a few bucks and a lot of chicken nuggets. After being out there for a few hours, I noticed a car that left a few times and came back to park in the Chick-fil-A parking lot with covered license plates. But the person never got out of the car. Of course I thought it was weird, but I didn't think anything of it. Throughout the day, I'd take my food to my car and I'd eat. Around 8 p.m., most of the plaza was closing up, and the traffic started to slow down. Finally, when Chick-fil-A slowed down for a few minutes, a man in the car got out and he walked up to the door of the restaurant and took a picture of the inside. A few seconds later, what looked like the manager came outside, and it looked like she was arguing with the guy. She went back inside and the man got back in his car, got on his phone, and left about 5 minutes later. FYI, I was parked about 25 feet away from the Chick-fil-A parking lot and could see everything that was going on. So a few hours go by and the place was closed. From the outside, it looked as if the employees were cleaning up. I was trying to fall asleep, then I saw that car from earlier pull up. Then it woke me all the way up. There were 2 cars left in the parking lot. His car and some other car. And some people left. The only person I saw inside was the woman that he was talking to earlier. I saw the man get out of his car at this point. He was wearing dark colors and with gloves on, and I saw the lights get turned off inside of Chick-fil-A. The man was standing on the side of the building by a dumpster, but in a way where he can't be seen. He was in the shadows. At that point, I leaned my seat all the way back so no one could see me. The woman walked out, turned around, and began to lock the door. As soon as she turned around, that man sprinted toward her, yanked her hair, and started to yell at her as he took her back inside. I leaned up a little bit to get a better look, but I couldn't see anything. There was nothing for about 10 minutes, until the man walked back outside. He went straight to his car, but instead of driving away, he drove up to the door and went back in with his trunk left open. A few minutes later, I saw something that I would never forget. The man was dragging the woman's body, but there was no head. He struggled to get her in the trunk, but eventually he got her there. He went back in there and came out with a Chick-fil-A bag full of something and threw it in his trunk. He went back inside again for what seemed like 20 minutes. He came back out, locked up Chick-fil-A, and drove away. Someone else came back for the other car in the parking lot. A few days later, I went into a Starbucks to use the restroom, and on the news was a story about a missing woman. They showed the picture, and it was the woman who worked at Chick-fil-A. They were interviewing her husband, who was crying during the whole interview. What creeped me out is that her husband was the man that I saw with her that fateful night. I know he killed her, but he was on the news as if he didn't have anything to do with it, and like he doesn't know. Seeing that lady that night has haunted me since.
Ever since I first went to Chick-fil-A, it's been one of my favorite restaurants. I've always loved their chicken sandwiches, and their sauce always hits the spot. However, the college that I recently graduated from is in an area where there's no Chick-fil-A nearby, so when I was at school, I could never have it. Last year, when the semester finally came to an end, I was driving back home to get to my parents' house, and I had the idea to get Chick-fil-A. I left my school in the morning, and it was a 4-hour drive to get back home. When I got about an hour away from home, my cravings got the better of me and I saw a Chick-fil-A and stopped. It was a Chick-fil-A that I had never been to before, but it looked relatively new and was very busy. I got in the drive-thru line, which was long but moving fast. I ordered the number 1, which is what I usually got, of a chicken sandwich, fries, and a drink. I was so hungry that I decided to park and eat it there. The Chick-fil-A was in a large shopping area that had a mall with a really big parking lot connected to it. So I drove to an open area of the mall parking lot that wasn't very busy. I started to eat, but before long I was kind of annoyed with the way that the sun was shining right into my front window onto me. I moved parking spaces down to where there was a shady spot near a tree. As I backed up my car out of the spot and started to drive, I saw that there was another car that was parked a little ways away from me that started to leave at the same time. I drove over and parked next to a tree, and the car followed me and parked about 10 spots away from me. I found it odd, but overall was more focused on eating. A while later, when I decided to continue with my drive home, I had forgotten all about the car and started to drive away. But when I did, I noticed the car start to drive with me. I never bothered to look to see who was driving it, and it was too far away to tell by this point. I once again found it odd, but what could I do? I got back on the road and then merged onto the freeway that was close by. I noticed the entire time that the car that was seemingly following me did the same. I got kind of worried when I saw this. I wondered why someone would follow me. Had I accidentally cut him off or something before? I kept on driving down the road and the car remained behind me the entire time. I tried some things like slowing down or changing lanes, but he kept following me. I still couldn't really tell much about how the driver looked because I still wasn't able to get a very good look at him. The closer I got to home, the more concerned I became because I didn't want to go all the way home and have this guy potentially know where I live. When I got about 10 minutes away from home, I decided to pull off the highway again and take the exit. I didn't really have much of a plan, but I knew I shouldn't go to my house with somebody following me. There was a little town that had a few stores and gas stations. I pulled into the parking lot of a supermarket and parked in a spot in the back where there weren't many other cars. Of course, the car that was following me did as well. I got out my phone and called my parents. I was going to tell them that I had been followed and ask them what to do. But before I could finish telling them, I saw that the car had parked in a spot behind me and a few spaces to the left. I noticed that the driver's door of the car opened, and both passengers' doors in the back did as well. I saw 3 large men all get out of the car and start heading towards me. In this moment, as they approached my car, I panicked and slammed my foot on the gas pedal and sped away. I saw the men then stop and begin to run back to their car. This is where I got lucky in a way. There happened to be a police car that was driving on the quiet road connecting the supermarket with other businesses. When he saw me speeding away in an almost reckless way, he pulled me over. The car that was following me slowed down too, but then drove away. When the officer got to my window, he told me I was driving a little wild, and I told him my situation. He then gave me just a warning to slow down and drive safer, and offered to drive behind me for a few miles to make sure that I wasn't followed. I took him up on the offer, and luckily I was able to make it home safely without ever seeing that car again. I still wonder sometimes though why that car was following me for so long, and what the men wanted. This story happened about a year ago. I was at Chick-fil-A with my girlfriend one night. It was one of both of our favorite restaurants, and we would get it all the time. Usually we would go through the drive-thru, but tonight we decided to eat inside the restaurant. It was a little bit later at night, and not very many other people were there at all. We sat in a booth on the far side of the restaurant, and were all by ourselves for the most part. We were eating, joking around, and just having normal conversation, when all of a sudden I heard a banging at the window right in front of me. We were sitting by the window, so I was super startled. Because it was dark out and the way the window was, I couldn't really see out of it very well at first, but when I looked, I saw a man. There was a guy who looked pretty mean. He was angrily banging on the glass right in front of us. My girlfriend and I were both pretty startled, and we watched the man to see what his problem was. He started to yell something at us, but I couldn't understand what he was yelling. The man wore a dark sweatshirt with the hood up and appeared to wear glasses and have a brown goatee. I don't know if he was insane or what, because I certainly hadn't done anything to make him angry. The man then suddenly stopped yelling and turned his back on us, then sprinted away into the night. My girlfriend and I both looked at each other in shock. "What was that?" she asked. I figured the guy was insane or on drugs or something like that, but we were both just glad that he was gone. Like many Chick-fil-A's, it was next to multiple businesses, so we figured he had come from one of those. We both talked about it for a few minutes, and then were ready to go back home. I had to use the bathroom, so I told my girlfriend that I would be right back and then we would leave. I walked inside the bathroom and to the urinal and did my business. As I was in there though, I remember seeing someone was using one of the stalls in the men's room. When I was done, I got to the sink and began washing my hands, when I heard the stall door start to open. I casually looked over to see who was coming out. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the same man who had been outside. He stopped in his place and just stared at me. Then, slowly, a really wide and creepy grin came over his face. I didn't waste any time and quickly left the bathroom as fast as I could. I saw my girlfriend was waiting for me by the door, and she could see the panic on my face. She asked me what was wrong, and I just told her we had to go. I didn't pay any attention to if the man followed us or not. When we got to the car, I told my girlfriend about how I had seen the man in the bathroom. She was really shocked to hear this, and we drove home after that. Thankfully, we never saw the man again. What was the most crazy thing is that we had a view of the only entrance to the restaurant the entire time, and we never saw the man come inside the door. I don't know how he was suddenly inside the bathroom, but thinking about it gives me the creeps. I worked at a Chick-fil-A a few years back. This was the weirdest thing to ever happen. When I worked there, I would oftentimes be at the drive-thru window handing customers their food. On one day, I don't remember the exact day of the week, but I know it was a weekday. Things were not all that busy and it was in the afternoon. I remember we had a lot of cars in the drive-thru and I dealt with many different people. At one point though, I recognized a man that I was handing food to. He had been there not long ago. It was a little weird, but I gave him his food and moved on. Then I saw him again about 20 minutes later. This time, he only ordered a drink. I gave it to him and he left, only to come back again 10 minutes later ordering another drink. This time, I jokingly made a comment to the man that he was here again, but the man denied it. He claimed this was his first time there and I was wrong. He also didn't seem very friendly at all. He kind of said it in a rude way. I gave him his drink and he left. I didn't see him for another 30 minutes or so, but then he came back again. This time, he just got a water. Every time he would come back, he would seemingly order just one small thing. I was really confused by this behavior. He came back several more times, getting small items each time, and he seemed angry as well. It was one of the strangest things that I had seen. I got off of work that night, and on my way home had to stop at the store to get a couple of things. I was in the store for no longer than 5 minutes, when suddenly I saw the same man walking down an aisle about 20 feet away. He didn't seem to notice me. I thought this was an insane coincidence, and I felt kind of creeped out because of just how crazy it was. I ended up leaving the store shortly after, and in the coming days I forgot about the man for the most part. But less than a week later, I was at my house taking out the trash when I saw the same man once again. This time he was walking down my street. I lived in a fairly big neighborhood, but I had never seen him prior to being at the Chick-fil-A. I felt really creeped out and went back inside. I'm not sure if the man saw me or not, but after that occurrence, I've never seen the man since. I just think it's really creepy how all that happened. Sometimes I wonder if he was stalking me or something like that. In fact, it's so crazy that a lot of people don't believe me when I tell them the story, but I know what happened. Either way, I'm glad I haven't seen the man since.
This happened about a month ago. I'm doing much better now, and for my future jobs, I will never take night shifts, as the dark alone gives me the creeps. I've applied for many jobs because I'm the legal age for working, as I'm in high school. I'm in desperate need of money, and I need to help my family out as well, so at this point, I would take any job I can get. 5 jobs accepted me, so I decided to do a trial at my first job that was pretty quick enough to accept, which happened to be McDonald's. I need to say that the staff and the manager were all very nice, and my friend also works there, which was a total bonus. The only really downfall working there was probably the customers, which my friend agreed. But anyway, I didn't really know what to pick for the shifts, or even if I wanted the job, so I asked for a practice shift. My manager happily agreed and let me choose my times. Instead of daytime shift, I chose the night, which was a very bad decision. But hey, I needed to see what it was like working there anyway, so this will be easy since it's night, right? Well, I was terribly wrong. I got ready in my friend's uniform that she let me borrow, and she even drove me there. I'll be honest, the McDonald's was rather sketchy. When I say sketchy, I mean there's so many alcoholics and druggies around, and upon arrival, it just didn't feel right. During the car ride, I had a gut feeling that it wasn't going to be a good shift, but my friend kept reassuring me that all will be fine. She dropped me off at the bus stop, which was 5 minutes from my workplace, and said that she would pick me up at 12 a.m. It was around 10 p.m., so my practice shift lasts for about 2 hours. I agreed and said for her to pick me up at the same spot that she dropped me off at. As she sped off, I merely watched as her car shrunk into the distance. After I saw it was gone, I started walking towards McDonald's, but while walking, I began to hear footsteps behind me. I didn't really think much of it because it was a normal thing. The person was probably just walking to their car or McDonald's or even the shops, but I had a really bad feeling. I felt like I was almost being watched, and I stopped for a second. The footsteps stopped with mine, and I looked behind to see a guy around his mid-40s just eyeing me off. I got really weirded out as he just smiled at me, and then breathed very heavily. He was taller than me, and he looked rather stronger and bigger than me as well. He was around what looked to be a few meters away. I quickly looked away and ran off to my workplace. There was only about 3 people working. my manager, and my male friend. It was about 10:30 p.m., and I had already had a share of drunken rude people filling the orders up, or even tried hitting on me. But he quickly left, and shortly afterwards, my friend showed up and helped me. He helped me out with most things, and I felt rather safe with him. He was actually an acquaintance of mine, but we soon grew to be best friends. After I was done taking some drunk guy's order, my friend pulled me aside and asked if I knew the guy outside. I was kind of confused at what he meant, and at first I thought he was just joking around. That is, until he pointed at the right window. My mouth went dry, and my face completely dropped. It was the same creepy guy that was following me before work. But I didn't tell him that. Instead, because I was an idiot, I kinda just laughed a bit and said that it was no big deal. He shrugged it off and we went back into the kitchen. It hit 11 p.m. No more customers were present and the same guy would not stop staring at me. At that point, I kind of just held my head down and just begged, hoping that he wouldn't come in. I could just feel his beady eyes run up and down my body. It was gross. It made me feel dirty. He's been there ever since the start of my shift and has been there for about 30 minutes, making it 10:30 now. I started to panic a bit as I was absolutely begging for him to not come in. In the middle of my thoughts, I heard something. My heart absolutely stopped as I then heard the sound of the door being opened. The creepy guy slowly walked towards my counter, eyeing my whole body until he was right in front of me, heavily breathing and almost drooling. His breath reeked like alcohol and cigarettes. He had a musky scent that, to be honest, nearly made me vomit. Red flags were totally going off, but I just tried to continue with my nice act. He wouldn't stop staring at me. I glanced at my friend who was in the kitchen. He was pretty busy, basically making sure nothing was getting burned. I turned my attention back to the guy and, no matter what I asked him, he was silent. It probably went on like that for about 5 minutes straight. That is, until he finally said something.
Such beautiful skin. So young. Short black hair. Such a nice complexion you have.
Before I could even speak or try and call someone over, something I wasn't prepared for then happened. The old guy launched towards me and tried entering the counter part, which happened to be the same part I was working at. He then looked at me like I was a piece of meat. Trying to climb over the counter wasn't easy for him though, eventually trying to grab me and getting stuck midway as I tried backing up. To my luck, I then slipped and totally landed on my butt. I tried my best crawling away, hoping that he wouldn't pass through. I was of course rather startled and afraid to the point that I couldn't even utter a single word. My friend dropped what he was doing as he screamed for my manager to then come over. My manager quickly showed up, which then made the old guy get back up and then flee. My friend quickly ran to my aid and he took me to the back room, which is what my manager told him to do in order to calm me down. Shortly after, we called the cops. I glanced at my friend as he looked pretty pale and rather puzzled, like he saw a ghost. My manager waited at the counter for the cops. That's when my friend quickly explained who the guy was. As it turns out, the guy was known for creeping on the female staff members while they worked. He would take pictures, ask for their number, offer alcohol, and even documented what they looked like. He was actually already banned from even entering the place or even being near it. The cops were already very aware of who he was due to his creepy behavior in the past. After the whole investigation and getting questioned, it was about 1 a.m. and I was let go. My friend was with my other friend while I got questioned, and on my way home, my friend held my hand and kept reassuring me that everything will be fine. Safe to say, I don't think I'll ever go back there again, and after this, I don't think I trust any night shifts. I think I'm gonna work at a different fast food place as well. So to that creepy old guy who's hopefully in jail, please stay away from me.
20-year-old Kelly Berg Dove lived with her 4-year-old daughter in Bridgewater, Virginia. She was a popular young woman. Not a single soul in all of Bridgewater seemed to have a bad word to say about her, least of all her loving husband, who she'd been romantically involved with since they were both high school sophomores. She also made a point of keeping in touch with her mother and sisters almost every single day. All in all, Kelly was about as wholesome as a person as you've ever likely to find, and even found the time to work night shifts at a local gas station to help support her family. They weren't exactly strapped for cash, but Kelly valued the idea of making a contribution that would allow them a taste of the finer things in life, as well as squirreling a little of her paycheck away each month for her daughter's college fund. But sometimes terrible things happen to the most wonderful of people, and on the night of June 18th, 1982, something was about to happen in the sleepy town of Bridgewater that would send shockwaves through the close-knit community. In the night in question, Kelly was working her usual night shift at Harrisonburg's Imperial gas station on South Main Street, Route 11. Kelly had gotten the job because her three sisters had either worked there in the past or were still currently employed by Imperial. The employer thought that it would make the girls more accountable for their work, and he was right. Whenever one was sick or couldn't come into work, another would always take her place. And on this night in particular, Kelly was covering for one of her sisters for a little extra college money for her young daughter. Kelly's mom, Rachel, was also a very loving and attentive person, and would often call the gas station whenever one of her daughters was working to check if they needed any food or hot coffee brought over to help them through their shift. When Rachel spoke to Kelly that night, nothing seemed to be amiss. To her, it was just another average night at a mostly quiet gas station in rural Virginia. But little did she know, this would be the last time she would ever talk to her daughter, as the evening's events were about to take a rather dark and terrifying turn. At around 2:30 in the morning, long after Kelly's mom had retired to bed, Kelly apparently called the Harrisonburg police. The call was to inform them that she had been aggressively harassed by a guy that she described as improperly dressed. It seems Kelly was far too polite to describe what this male customer actually did in any kind of detail, but it's safe to assume that the implied meaning was that he had exposed himself to her. Just a few minutes after this first call, Kelly called again, this time pleading with the dispatcher for a patrol unit to be sent to the gas station. The same man that apparently exposed himself was calling the station to make obscene threats, and it seems that Kelly was growing anxious as she believed he was willing to follow through with them. The dispatcher promised to get a unit out to her as soon as possible, and that she should hang tight. However, just moments after the second call ended, Kelly dialed 911 yet again, only this time she was in a complete panic. With a voice that was dripping with fear, she demanded to know how far away the responding officers were, as the same deranged customer had apparently returned and was sitting in a silver or gray Ford that was parked in the gas station's parking lot. The last thing the 911 dispatcher heard was Kelly screaming that the man had just gotten out of the vehicle and was heading towards the gas station's main building. She then slammed the phone down, apparently preparing to defend herself. The cops rushed over to the Imperial gas station, expecting to arrive to a violent assault in progress. But to their bemusement, when they arrived at the gas station, the place was as quiet as the grave. They searched the entire site, but Kelly was nowhere to be found. All that remained was her purse. There were no signs of any kind of violent struggle, no indications that the store had been robbed, but there were also no clues as to where Kelly was. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. What's clear is that if the suspect was armed, he could have forced Kelly into his vehicle in just a matter of seconds. Kelly's family believed this to be the case, as they insisted that any attempt by an unarmed man to grab her and shove her into their vehicle would have resulted in Kelly fighting back vigorously. The police investigation that followed led officers to a nearby convenience store, where a clerk informed them that he had been visited by a man driving a gray vehicle about a half hour before Kelly's disappearance. The clerk told him that the man was aged between 20 to 25 years old and had blonde, shoulder-length hair. This might seem like an obvious lead, but the cops were unable to track down this man, so no connection between him and Kelly's apparent abduction could ever be made. The police then interviewed Kelly's three sisters, who were also employed by the gas station. They were shocked to hear that the obscene kind of phone calls that Kelly had received that night were commonplace, but that no one had ever acted on them, believing them to be from some harmless old pervert whose bark was louder than his bite, so to speak. They also didn't entirely believe that the man that had harassed Kelly that night was the same person making the phone calls, as there didn't seem to be anything overly threatening about the lewd calls, while the driver of the silver or gray Ford was obviously aggressive enough to show up to the gas station in person. Yet after news hit that one of the gas station girls had apparently been abducted, the phone calls seemed to stop entirely for a while, only resuming around 6 weeks later when this apparently harmless old perv called and made lewd comments to one of the gas station's new hires. This could well be because whoever was making the calls simply wasn't involved in the abduction and didn't want to implicate themselves as a suspect in such a violent and disturbing crime. But it also could be because the same person who made the calls was satisfied with abducting Kelly and didn't feel the need to make another call, not until the same hunger resurfaced in them around a month and a half after the fact. When local media outlets contacted Kelly's parents regarding their daughter's disappearance, they gave a rather shocking answer to some very probing questions. When asked if they had any idea who might have kidnapped or harmed their daughter, and if this person might be a member of the local community, Kelly's parents unequivocally answered in the affirmative. Although the police had asked them not to publicly speak the man's name, they believed her abductor had been someone Kelly had gone to high school with, someone who had a long history of indecent exposure and making obscene telephone calls, and according to Kelly's sister, also drove a silvery gray Ford. But surely if Kelly had known the man personally, even just by association, she would have named him on one of the 3 911 calls she made leading up to her abduction. But it's also very possible that this person had either obscured their face somehow, or Kelly had simply not recognized him given that they had both graduated some time ago. There's also the possibility that Kelly was so terrified that she just failed to mention the man by name during one of the calls. Either way, the police obviously found the possibility of this man being the culprit so plausible that they asked Kelly's parents not to use his name publicly. Yet despite this, he was never charged with any crime, as there was simply not enough evidence to attempt any kind of conviction. There were several other suspects in the case, and authorities were sure to question all of them. But at a time when CCTV cameras and DNA evidence were still just technological pipe dreams, actually placing a suspect at the scene that night was all but impossible. For all intents and purposes, the person who showed up at the Imperial gas station that night was a ghost, someone who showed up, bundled Kelly Berg Dove into a vehicle, and then seemingly vanished themselves. Barely a trace of either of them was left behind, merely a purse and a vehicle description, far too little for the cops to go on to secure a suspect, Kelly, or her body. Almost 40 years later, what happened that night remains almost a total mystery, with Kelly being declared legally deceased by local authorities. Despite her family pouring money into private investigators to try to find out exactly what happened, they're no closer to getting any solid answers as they were almost 4 decades ago. The only truth we have of that night is the terrifying reality that Kelly went to work that night, not suspecting a thing, and ended up encountering someone that caused her to vanish from the face of the earth. And that, horrifyingly enough, is something that could happen to each and every one of us.
If you really like my content and want to support me, please like this video and click the subscribe button. It helps me to grow my channel as essential in reaching a wider audience. Most of you watching my videos aren't subscribed to my channel, and that's why my animations can't reach their full potential. They aren't recommended to more people who would surely love my content as much as you do. You can always unsubscribe at any moment. Thank you in advance, and enjoy the rest of the video.
It was the summer of 2015, and I had just gotten my first well-paying job at a gas station. It was one of the more bigger gas stations you'd see about halfway to a destination to stop for food or to use the restroom. While it might have not been the most exciting job in the world, it was definitely one that paid a substantial amount of money. For reference, I'm a female and was 24 years old at the time. I'm pretty short and weigh around 100 pounds. At the time, I didn't have a car, so I had to rely on taking the public bus to get to and from work. Since business was usually pretty slow during the night shift, my manager allowed me to chill out behind the counter if I had nothing to do. Sometimes you'd have your occasional 2 or 3 customers come in at around 1 a.m. for a late night snack, but other than that, the store was mostly dead. Most of the time, I'd be at the front minding my business, scrolling through Instagram and whatnot. It was a chill and great opportunity for me to catch up on my personal needs as well. One night, my manager had asked if I could work late as the guy working after me had suddenly quit and went to go make a living in watchmaking. Apparently, this guy obviously hadn't heard of a 2 weeks notice before, so I was livid to say the least. Whatever, it was extra pay and I couldn't afford to fall behind on rent. With me practically working double shifts at this point, I was running the store for long hours into the night. Some nights I'd have to bring my coffee to help keep me awake as the job could get boring pretty quickly. For the first few months, everything seemed to be going well, and I was even able to catch up on my studies. I had worked with my other coworker, Brandon, but we never really exchanged conversation as he mainly worked in the back. There was this one night, however, where something happened that little did I know would completely break me. I was working my usual nightly shift and I was cleaning up the floors after a customer had vomited from drinking too much. Once I clean everything up, I hear the door open and in walks a man with a backpack. He had a white beard and wore a dirty white tank top with cargo pants. I wave at him as a way of saying hello, and he then gives me an unsettling grin while looking back at me. I'm from the South, so it wasn't uncommon to see these types of people every now and then. He proceeds to grab a 6-pack of beer from our refrigerator and puts it on the counter, and I say hi once again. So, Ashley, what time are you out of here? Right from the start, this guy smelled like straight up weed and I could smell the alcohol in his breath. I nervously chuckle and say, 7. Ah, I see. Do you need a ride? I can take you home. I tell him no thank you and that I already have one and change the subject by telling him his total. He gets out his wallet and proceeds to hand me a $10 bill, making sure our hands touched. I give him his change and tell him to have a nice night, and he then starts to ask if he could give me a ride home again. I tell him no, and he grabs his beer, giving me a wave before saying, "See you later, Ashley." He walks out the door, and I watch him get into his truck and drive off. He doesn't actually know when I'm off, so I figured I was out of the woods. A few hours go by and I finish up the remaining time for my shift before the person working after us comes in. I tell Brandon, who was still in the back, about what had happened, and he offered me a ride home so I wouldn't have to take the bus. Brandon and I walk out into the parking lot, and so far the coast seemed clear with no sign of the man. Long story short, he drives me home and I go to sleep until the following night. My mom had dropped me off at work and I go in to see my manager standing there. Upon entering, he immediately comes up to me and says, "Ashley, is everything okay? How did you get home last night?" I told him that Brandon gave me a ride home, and my manager gets this confused look on his face. "Oh, that's weird because some guy came in just before 7. He said he was here to pick you up." A few months ago, I had just started working the graveyard shift at a Target in a big city on the east coast of Massachusetts. For reference, I'm a female and was 17 at the time of this story. I'm pretty short, about 5'6", and weighed about 150 pounds. The store happened to be located in a residential area that wasn't so great or safe. What I mean by that is that there would sometimes be break-ins and shootings once in a while. Let's just say the cops drove by several times a week. Because it wasn't as safe as most areas, there would always be a security guard by the front doors at all times named Chris. He was from Chicago and was a trained boxer, able to take on anyone who may pose a threat. My coworkers and I tried talking with him here and there, but he was mostly quiet and focused on himself. Having him there made me feel a lot more safe, as I have really bad asthma attacks and get frightened really easily. At the time, I didn't have my inhaler or breathing treatment with me, so an asthma attack would result in me going to the hospital. One night at around 8 p.m., I was doing my usual routine of scanning the merchandise in one of the sections of the store. As I'm putting away some shirts where they belong, I notice a man at the end of the aisle. I politely ask if he needed help, and he walks right over to me asking where the men's shoes were. I direct him to section C, and he then says, "You know, you're very beautiful." I smile and say, "Thank you very much," and continue to stock the remaining shirts. The store is pretty much dead at this point, as we don't get a lot of customers at this time of night. He thankfully goes over in the direction of the shoes, and I finish putting away the shirts. One of my coworkers, Hannah, comes over to me and asks me about the guy who I was talking to. I told her I didn't know, and we both go and get ready to clock out as we were getting ready to close. Hannah tells me to go around and check for any more people who still might have been in the store. For the most part, the store is practically empty, but I then found the same man still in section C. I politely tell him that we were closing, and he gives me this weird grin on his face. "Do you need a ride home? We can go back to my place." I tell him no and ask him to please leave the store and that we were closing. However, he doesn't listen and comes up to me and starts to grope me. At this point, I'm starting to panic, realizing what had just taken place, but knew I had to keep my breathing in check. I slowly turn around and walk toward the front entrance, telling Chris about what had just took place. Being the nice and kind-hearted person he was, he confronted him and told him that he wasn't allowed back in the store again. The guy showed no remorse and just stayed quiet while walking out of the store. Because I was still a minor at the time, Chris offered to stay behind until my parents came to get me. When they came, Chris had told them about what had happened and explained that he would inform the manager the next day. I worked at that store for another 3 months and only saw the guy once, staring through the windows. I still don't know what would have happened had Chris not been there that night. When I was about 19 or so, I got my first ever real job working at a gas station during the spring. It wasn't the best paying job, but it was enough to get my foot through the door to start making payments for college and stuff. I lived by myself in a small one-bedroom apartment that my parents paid for, but got the job in the meantime to cover other expenses. My managers, being the jerks that they were, gave me a week of night shifts knowing I had a 7 a.m. class every morning. It was annoying to say the least, but I really needed the money. During the night shift, you'd have people constantly come in and out for gas, and right around the 10 p.m. mark, business would be slow for the most part. After that, you'd maybe have 1 or 2 shady people come in once an hour for a snack or cigarettes. That being said, it's still a pretty good time where I could chill out for a few hours. One night, I was on my shift as usual and had just finished serving what I thought was the last customer for the night as I was about to end my shift. As I'm packing up and getting ready to leave, a car pulls up right in front of the store and a man gets out. He wore a stained white shirt and had a scruffy beard with messy hair. He walks right in and I greet him with a hello and asked if I could help him with anything. He completely ignores my question and walks over to the refrigerators and grabs a 6-pack of beer. I live in the South, so people like this were very common around here. I tell him his total and he then says something that made my skin crawl. "Hey, you're really pretty. I love your hair." Laughing awkwardly, I tell him thanks and he proceeds to hand me a $10 bill, making sure our hands touched. I give him his change and tell him to have a good rest of his night and go on my phone, hoping he'd get the hint to leave me alone. He thankfully left and I waited for my coworker who was working after me to arrive so I could go home. However, he must have been running late because it was 10 minutes past his shift and I was getting a bit annoyed. 10 minutes turned into 20 and then eventually 30. As I was about to call him to see where he was, I then noticed someone hiding behind one of the gas pumps. It was a little hard to see, but because of the light, I could make it out to be the same man from earlier. I had no idea as to what he was doing, but I could tell that it clearly wasn't good. He then comes out from behind the pump, and I see that he's clearly hiding something behind his back, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I grabbed my keys and was headed out toward my car when I see him approach the front door, giving me this unsettling look. It was a look of hatred and fury. Suddenly he pulls out a gun and proceeds to show it to me as if he wanted me to know that he was armed. At this point, I'm frantically dialing 911 on my phone, and he then shoots the lock and steps inside yelling at me while having me at gunpoint. He orders me to give him all the money in the register or he won't hesitate to pull the trigger. I take a few deep breaths and calmly hand him the money we had, and he then takes off down the road. I call the police while bawling my eyes out in fear, and the operator tells me to stay on the line with her until an officer arrived. Thankfully, the guy never made it too far, as police had managed to track him down. Turns out, this guy was wanted for sexual assault and murder. His victims were 2 family members, one of them being his wife, 1 widower, and 2 gas station employees. Just like me. The next day, I quit my job at that gas station and now work at my local supermarket.
I worked at a museum a couple of years back, maybe a decade ago. I was a night shift security guard. It was as boring as you could imagine, but I desperately needed the money and it paid a few more dollars than any other job I could land, so I figured why not. I remember landing a construction job a year into working this night shift security job. I enjoyed construction a lot more and I desperately needed to get my life back on track. Being on night shift really messed with my mood and general well-being. The construction job I got had roughly the same pay, so it was a no-brainer even if I had to do a little bit more manual labor. As much as I disliked the job itself, I really liked all the people that worked at that museum. They were actually really cool. I went ahead and gave them my 2 weeks' notice and told them that I would stick around for as long as they needed me to find a replacement. They hired some skinny pale guy named Justin. When I first met him, he seemed like he was a decent enough guy. After all, it really wasn't my problem once I left. After a couple of shifts with him, though, I noticed that he was an extremely awkward and very strange person. He did this thing where he would change the tone of his voice mid-sentence. It was really strange, and it almost made me feel like he had some kind of mental issue. Trust me, I wasn't being judgmental or anything, and if you heard it yourself, you would probably have had the same concern. Not that I thought that he was dangerous or anything, just a little out there with a possible mental illness, maybe even a speech impediment. But anyway, it was my third or fourth shift training him, and it was an ordinary night just like any other. As weird as he may have been, he seemed somewhat depressed or sad. I caught on pretty easily as he didn't make much of an effort to conceal it. We were making the usual trip throughout the entire museum, which was honestly a pretty long walk. We were probably about 10 minutes into it when I finally just asked him why he seemed so sad. He told me that he was really lonely and couldn't get a girlfriend. Again, if you had one look at this guy, you would probably understand why he couldn't get a girlfriend, let alone his weird personality. I tried telling him that there were plenty of fish in the sea and that he could probably have some luck on the internet. Online dating wasn't as big back then, though. He kind of shrugged his shoulders and just continued being sad. Whatever, I didn't know what else I could tell him. After that point, it became gradually weirder and weirder with each passing night. It was really strange. For instance, he would start going on these massive monologues about the most random things in the world. I only had to stay for a couple more shifts, but it honestly became really intolerable being around this guy. There was one night where he talked for at least 15 entire minutes about the environmental harm of pizza crust. Yes, literally pizza crust. It made absolutely no sense in the world. I tried interrupting him a couple of times to ask what was up, but he just cut me off and even started ignoring me after a certain point. When you are completely alone in a massive building with one other person, trust me when I say that their mental well-being is very important. I gradually began feeling more and more unsafe in the presence of this weird guy. Justin just seemed like he was going crazy or something. Thankfully, my entire shift with him went by decently enough. It was still awkward and moderately unbearable, but it was at least over. I started my new job and everything seemed to be going really well. I had completely forgotten about Justin and life seemed to move on. I didn't really think about that security job anymore at all. That was until I heard about an interesting story from my friend a few months later. I still kept in touch with a few people from the museum that worked there during the day. We were only Facebook friends, but that was enough for me. One of them messaged me to ask me what I thought about that guy Justin that replaced me. I was honest with her and told her that I thought Justin was really strange and possibly insane or something. And she typed back, "You're going to love this then." She then proceeded to tell me about Justin being fired for completely destroying an entire exhibit on night shift. I guess they came in at the morning shift and found him trying to put it back together. They watched the security footage and this guy literally tried to fight a dinosaur skeleton. I guess he had been acting really weird that night, judging by what she had told me about the rest of the security footage. But the interesting part of the story is that they somehow found out he was on antipsychotic medication. They figured that he probably had stopped taking his medication. That was all my friend knew, and that's all I know. It's really scary how people can stop taking their very necessary medication on a whim, and then potentially have a complete mental breakdown. I started wondering if he had been off his meds when I first met him. All I know is that I'm kinda happy I don't ever have to see Justin again.